It's just a cold. You'll be fine if you sleep it off." I couldn't believe what my husband had just said. Despite my high fever, he was planning to leave me and our young daughter to attend a friend's wedding overseas. Off he went, genuinely excited about his trip, unaware of the surprising twists awaiting him. My name is Allison. I'm a 35-year-old stay-at-home mom, living with my husband, David, and our 5-year-old daughter, Misty. Misty adores picture books and is a sweet, kind-hearted girl who fills our home with laughter. She is my pride and joy. David is a social butterfly, well-versed in various hobbies and always full of entertaining stories. He was the man I was proud to marry, and I believed that our union would bring eternal happiness. In the beginning, our married life was blissful. We enjoyed a sweet newlywed phase and were blessed with a child fairly quickly. At David's request, I quit my job when I got pregnant. The pregnancy was smooth, and I gave birth to Misty without any complications. That's when everything changed. After the birth, David underwent a drastic transformation. He started criticizing me relentlessly, calling me fat because I struggled to shed the baby weight. "You're not attractive anymore," he'd say. Make an effort to lose some weight. While grappling with the challenges of first-time parenting, I was also chastised for not keeping up with household chores. Despite my pleas for assistance, David's response was harsh. "Don't be lazy. You eat but can't even handle chores or childcare." Unbelievable. It became evident that David resented the time household responsibilities and childcare demanded of him. I was taken aback by this selfish side of him, especially considering how excited he had been about the pregnancy. Whenever I mustered the courage to ask for help, David would complain to neighbors and relatives, portraying me as negligent and incompetent, which left me feeling humiliated and afraid to confront him. However, the most significant problem was money. Before Misty arrived, we both contributed to a joint account and spent the rest as we pleased. Once she was born, David took charge of finances since I no longer had an income. Unfortunately, he provided very little for our living expenses. On one occasion, he insisted I manage with just $300 for all three of us. This caused me immense stress, affecting my ability to produce enough breast milk, forcing us to rely on formula. Between formula and diapers alone, $300 was woefully inadequate. Desperate to save money, I started cooking budget meals, but David's response was anything but supportive. He would angrily criticize the food, saying, "Don't serve me this cheap-smelling food." When I suggested finding a job to contribute financially, he belittled me, claiming, "You can't handle housework, let alone a job and raising a child. You're just planning to slack off and make me do everything. Manage with the money I give you." David vehemently opposed the idea of me working, perhaps fearing it would increase his household responsibilities. Now that Misty is 5 years old, David seems to have lost interest in her. He often ignores her attempts to engage with him, opting instead to immerse himself in his phone. I had believed that marrying David would create a happy family, but I was mistaken. Witnessing Misty's disappointment as David ignores her and refuses to play with her breaks my heart. Then, one day, I discovered that David had used the money we had saved for Misty's education. As I am not working, I worry that we are barely scraping by each month. David is responsible for managing our finances, yet he refuses to disclose our savings or expenditures. I suspect we may not be saving at all and could be running a deficit each month, prompting him to dip into the education fund. When I confronted David about it, he adamantly refused to explain how he had spent the money. Finally, he snapped, "I earned this money. How I spend it is my business. You and Misty eat because of me, so stop complaining." Despite my repeated attempts to discuss the matter, David remained obstinate, and our conversations led nowhere. Then David dropped a bombshell. A friend invited me to their wedding overseas. I was stunned. Even if his friends covered some travel expenses, going abroad would still be a significant financial strain. We were already struggling to afford Misty's education, so how could we possibly afford an overseas trip? I tried to discuss this with David, but he brushed off my concerns and began making arrangements for the trip. Divorce crossed my mind briefly, but the thought of Misty having only one father held me back. I couldn't bear to take that away from her. The day before David was set to leave, I was hit with a high fever. It had been years since I last had a fever, and this was the first time as an adult. I was plagued by headaches, nausea, dizziness, and body aches that clouded my senses. "Could you please consider skipping the wedding? I'm really struggling with this fever," I asked weakly. David chuckled dismissively, saying, You'll be fine if you sleep it off. His tone carried an edge of impatience as he added, "Stop being so needy. Handle it yourself. You can't even manage yourself, and you're not even working." Desperate, I pleaded, "Could you at least get some food for Misty? She hasn't eaten properly since yesterday." Exhaling heavily, David replied, "I don't have time for that, and I don't want to catch anything. I'm staying in the hotel tonight." With that, he left us behind to attend the overseas wedding. At that moment, suffering from a high fever, I had made a decision. For Misty's sake, I knew I had to let go of someone as selfish as David. 5 days later, David returned home in high spirits. "I'm back. Why are Mom and Dad here?" David's parents were sitting in the living room. They remained silent. "What's going on? Where's Allison?" It was Misty who answered David's question. "Mom is in heaven now." "What? What are you talking about?" David, thinking Misty was joking, burst into laughter. His parents shook their heads in disbelief. "You've made a terrible mistake. It's too late now," his father finally said. David looked bewildered, struggling to understand the weight of their words. Did Allison really die from that high fever? David muttered to himself as he watched his parents leave the house with Misty. She waved at him, but as usual, he ignored her. His parents got into the car and drove away. That was the plan. My parents and I were quietly waiting in the kids' room. I had my phone connected to my in-laws and was monitoring the living room through a hidden camera on my computer. Nearby, my sister stood ready to pick up Misty, shielding her from hearing things she shouldn't. Only my in-laws remained in the car. During David's time overseas, I had informed both sets of parents about his appalling behavior. I had been contemplating divorce, but I knew he would resist paying alimony or child support. Thus, I sought their support in revealing the truth for the divorce proceedings. I had told Misty she might not see David again, and when she expressed a desire to say goodbye, I arranged for my in-laws to be present in the living room. Remarkably, Misty didn't protest the possibility of not seeing her father again. Even at her young age, she seemed to understand that her father wasn't treating her well. From now on, I would have to focus on Misty's well-being above all else. I wondered how David would react to Misty's words, "Mom is in heaven." Would he show remorse for his actions or apologize tearfully? I watched in silence through the hidden camera, hoping for some sign of regret. Instead, David did something unexpected. He made a phone call, his voice filled with elation. "Brianna, I don't have all the details yet, but it looks like my wife is gone. Finally, the obstacle is out of the way. I should get the insurance money soon. Let the old folks take care of Misty. Let's be together. You're the only one I love, Brianna." At that moment, we realized David had been having an affair all along, and he saw me and our child as obstacles to his plans. He intended to use the insurance money to marry this other woman. My parents, who were watching the footage with me, shared my fury. Meanwhile, my in-laws, who were on the phone with us, had also heard David's call and were equally incensed. I signaled to both sets of parents, and together we stormed into the living room where David stood, shocked to see us. "Wait, Allison, but I thought you were in heaven," he stammered, trying to explain himself. I couldn't hold back my laughter at David's ignorance. Heaven is what Misty calls her room. It's filled with sky blue sheets and white pillows. You wouldn't know because you never bother talking to her. "Wait, really?" I thought. "Well, never mind." David stumbled, unaware that we had overheard his phone call and trying to backtrack, but it was futile. "Enough with the excuses. We've been watching you on a hidden camera. You abandoned your sick family to attend a wedding, and you've been having an affair." I confronted him firmly. "No, it's not like that. I haven't." David attempted to defend himself, but I cut him off. "No more lies. The decision is made. We're getting a divorce, and I'll be pursuing alimony and child support, so get ready," I declared. My father-in-law erupted in anger, his face flushed. "If you go through with this, don't ever show your face here again. You're no longer our son," he shouted vehemently. Immediately following that, David's cell phone rang, filling the room with his distinctive ringtone. David made no move to answer, so I picked up his phone to see who it was. The caller was Brianna, David's mistress. Without hesitation, I answered the call and put it on speaker so everyone present could hear. "Hello? What was that about earlier? Living together was just a joke, right? I have a fiancé, so stop deluding yourself. I can't be with someone so clueless. Don't contact me again." Brianna's voice rang through the room before she hung up abruptly. David, now rejected by his mistress as well, went pale and fell to his knees, pleading for forgiveness. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. If my family disowns me, you're the only one I have left. And I can't afford to pay alimony or anything like that. I've already spent so much on Brianna during this trip." David started rambling unprompted, as if attempting to explain himself. I gave him a stern glare. "So you didn't attend a wedding. You left your family behind for a romantic getaway." Well," David faltered, unable to find words to justify his actions. I couldn't believe he would abandon us and incriminate himself by admitting to an affair. I questioned why I had ever married such a fool. I should have divorced him much earlier. Watching David stumble over his words, I resolved to focus on moving forward with my life, just Misty and me. Later, I checked David's phone and discovered numerous photos and videos from his trip with his mistress. It was evident that his story about attending a friend's wedding was a complete fabrication. Armed with this evidence, I consulted a lawyer and initiated divorce proceedings, seeking rightful compensation and child support. The lawyer conducted an investigation, including a visit to Brianna, who supposedly worked at a nightclub. During the inquiry, Brianna claimed she was merely entertaining an older man as part of her job, but David stubbornly insisted they were in love, causing a significant uproar. It became undeniable that David had been financially supporting Brianna, which explained why he had been stingy with her living expenses and even dipped into Misty's college fund. David's life spiraled into misery, burdened by debts from his extravagant spending and the financial fallout of our divorce. His troubles compounded when news of his affair and lavish trips surfaced at his workplace, leading to a loss of respect and standing among his colleagues. Ironically, the nightclub where Brianna worked turned out to be a popular haunt for David's coworkers, leading to a dramatic confrontation between them. Some of David's colleagues witnessed the scene, spreading gossip throughout the company about his indiscretions. It seemed David confronted Brianna unaware that she was engaged, adding to the spectacle. It was pathetic how easily he let himself be manipulated by a young woman. This incident isolated David at work, further cementing his downward spiral. I later heard he was demoted and faced a significant salary reduction. My lawyer, who kept me informed throughout, also updated me on Brianna's unfortunate turn of events. Her fiancé, a regular patron at the club, discovered her affair with David and promptly called off their engagement. He even demanded compensation for the wedding expenses they had already incurred. Struggling to meet this hefty demand, Brianna resorted to deceitful tactics with other club patrons, which inevitably came to light. Consequently, she was fired from her job. Now, Brianna juggles multiple part-time jobs to repay her debts, living alone in a modest apartment. As for me, I've moved back home and am now living with my parents and Misty. It's a relief to be away from the neighbors who believe David's rumors and lies about me. Life is much calmer now. My parents adore Misty, and she seems happier than she was when she lived with David. David has come to my parents' house a few times, pleading for another chance, but my dad has firmly turned him away. Neither Misty nor I have any desire to see him. If Misty expresses a wish to see her father in the future, I'll consider it, but for now, she has no interest in meeting him. I have no intention of reconciling with David, so I see no reason to engage with him. If his persistence becomes too much, I'm prepared to involve the police. Reflecting on where David and his mistress Brianna are now, I see how destructive affairs can be. They've lost everything and are now living a much more difficult life. It's entirely their own doing. From now on, my focus is on cherishing the happiness I have with my parents and Misty, and leaving David in the past.
I slammed the door of my office, the vibration rattling the framed blueprints on the wall. Another day, another argument with a client who thought they knew better than a professional architect with 15 years of experience. I sank into my chair, rubbing my temples. A soft knock interrupted my brooding. "Rose? Everything all right in there?" I sighed. "Come in, Leonard." The door creaked open, and Leonard's salt and pepper head poked through. "Brought you some coffee. Figured you might need it after that spirited discussion." I couldn't help but smile. Leonard had been my mentor when I first started at the firm, and now, even as colleagues, he still looked out for me. "Thanks, Leonard. You're a lifesaver." He set the mug on my desk, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Same old story. Client thinks because they watched a few home renovation shows, they're suddenly experts in structural engineering." Leonard chuckled. Ah, the joys of our profession. You handled it well, though. I was impressed. Really? I raised an eyebrow, because I feel like I just got run over by a dump truck full of unrealistic expectations. He leaned against my desk, his voice softening. Rose, you're one of the best architects I've ever worked with. Don't let one difficult client shake your confidence. I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. Leonard always knew just what to say. Sometimes I wondered if the moment was broken by my phone buzzing. I glanced at the screen, expecting another work email. Instead, I saw an unfamiliar number. Everything okay? Leonard asked, noticing my frown. Yeah, just a weird text. I showed him the message. The truth about your parents will shock you. Meet me at Riverside Park, 7 p.m. tonight if you want answers. Leonard's brow furrowed. That's concerning. Are you going to go? I bit my lip, conflicted. I don't know. It's probably just some prank or scam, right? Probably, Leonard agreed, but he didn't sound convinced. Still, maybe you should bring someone with you just in case. I shook my head. No, I need to handle this myself. The truth was, my relationship with my parents had always been complicated. If there really was some hidden truth, I needed to face it alone. Leonard looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just squeezed my shoulder. All right, but promise me you'll be careful. And call me if you need anything, okay? I nodded, grateful for his concern. As he left my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change dramatically. The rest of the day crawled by in a haze of meetings and phone calls. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, my stomach was in knots. I found myself standing at the edge of Riverside Park, scanning the faces of passers-by, wondering which one held the key to my past. Rose Thompson? I spun around to see a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a folder tucked under her arm. Yes, that's me, I said cautiously. She thrust the folder at me. Everything you need to know is in here. I'm sorry, but your parents aren't who you think they are. Before I could respond, she turned and disappeared into the evening crowd, leaving me clutching a folder that suddenly felt as heavy as my racing heart. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. The first words made my blood run cold. DNA test results. No genetic match found between Rose Thompson and her presumed parents. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Who was I? And more importantly, who were the people I had called Mom and Dad for the past 35 years? The revelation about my parents hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me adrift in a sea of confusion and betrayal. For days, I wandered through life in a daze, barely able to focus on work. Leonard kept shooting me concerned glances, but I couldn't bring myself to share the truth. How could I, when I barely understood it myself? It was in this fragile state that my friend Megan dragged me to a charity event for urban development. You need to get out, Rose, she insisted. Meet some new people, maybe even a handsome stranger. I rolled my eyes but allowed her to pull me along. As we entered the crowded ballroom, I felt overwhelmed by the sea of unfamiliar faces. That's when I quite literally bumped into him. Oh, I'm so sorry, I exclaimed, mortified as I watched my champagne splash onto his crisp white shirt. He laughed, a warm, rich sound that made me look up. No worries. I was looking for an excuse to ditch this monkey suit anyway. His easy smile and twinkling blue eyes caught me off guard. I'm Jake, he said, extending his hand. Urban planner and occasional champagne magnate. Despite myself, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Rose, architect and accidental drink thrower. We fell into easy conversation, discussing our shared passion for sustainable city design. For the first time in days, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. So, Rose, Jake said, leaning in conspiratorially, what do you say we ditch this stuffy party and grab a real drink? I know a great little place around the corner. I hesitated, glancing at Megan, who was giving me an emphatic thumbs up from across the room. You know what? Why not? The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. Jake and I saw each other almost every day, our connection deepening with each shared laugh and passionate debate about urban planning. He was kind, intelligent, and seemed to genuinely care about me. One Sunday afternoon, Jake invited me to a family barbecue. I want you to meet them, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. They're going to love you. As we pulled up to a charming suburban home, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. My own family was a mess. Parents who weren't really my parents, a sister I barely spoke to. What if Jake's family saw right through me? but the moment we stepped through the door, I was enveloped in warmth. Jake's mother, Linda, pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, Rose, we've heard so much about you. Welcome, sweetheart." Jake's father, Robert, shook my hand with a twinkle in his eye. "So you're the brilliant architect who's stolen our boy's heart, eh?" And then there was Ella, Jake's younger sister. She bounded up to me, full of energy. "Rose, Jake says you're amazing at your job. I'm thinking about studying architecture too. Can I pick your brain sometime?" As the afternoon wore on, I found myself relaxing, drawn into the easy banter and genuine affection of Jake's family. It was everything I'd always longed for, but never had. Later, as Jake and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset, he turned to me with a serious expression. "Rose, I know we haven't known each other long, but I think you might be the one. I've never felt this way about anyone before." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind and dive headfirst into this fairy tale, but the other part, the part still reeling from the revelation about my parents, held back. "Jake, I hesitated, torn between my growing feelings and my fear of being hurt again. "There's something I need to tell you. About my family." He squeezed my hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You're part of our family now, Rose." As I looked into his earnest eyes, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. Could I really trust this perfect picture, or was I setting myself up for another heartbreak? The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of happiness. Jake and I grew closer, and I found myself spending more time with his family, especially Ella. One sunny afternoon, we sat in her room, surrounded by college brochures and architecture magazines. "Rose, I can't thank you enough for helping me with this," Ella said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I never thought I'd actually have a shot at getting into a top architecture program." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "You've got real talent, Ella, and determination. That's half the battle right there." She bit her lip, hesitating. "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, curious. "Jake mentioned you don't talk to your family much. I hope you don't mind me asking, but why?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't told Jake's family about the DNA test results yet. "It's complicated," I said softly. "I recently found out some unsettling information about my parents. I'm still processing it." Ella's eyes widened. "Oh, Rose, I'm so sorry, but you know you have us now, right? You're like the big sister I never had." Her words touched me deeply, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you, Ella. That means more than you know." As I left Ella's room, I nearly collided with Jake in the hallway. His face lit up when he saw me, and before I could say a word, he dropped to one knee. My heart stopped. "Rose," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know this might seem fast, but when you know, you know. You've brought so much joy and love into my life. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to spin around me. Part of me wanted to scream yes immediately, but the other part, the part still reeling from the revelation about my parents, hesitated. "Jake, I don't know what to say," I stammered. His face fell slightly, but he rallied. "You don't have to answer right now. Just think about it, okay?" I nodded, my mind whirling. The next day at work, I was still in a daze when Leonard knocked on my office door. "Rose, you okay? You seem distracted." I looked up at him, suddenly realizing I needed to talk to someone. "Jake proposed?" I blurted out. Leonard's face went through a series of rapid emotions before settling on a forced smile. "That's wonderful, isn't it?" I sighed. "I don't know, Leonard. It's all happening so fast, and with everything going on with my family." He sat down across from me, his eyes filled with concern. "Rose, you know you can always talk to me, right? About anything." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted outside my office. The door burst open, and Jake strode in, followed by a crowd of our coworkers. "Surprise!" they all shouted. I stared in shock as Jake grinned and held up a banner that read, "Congratulations on your engagement." "I know you haven't officially said yes yet," Jake said, his eyes twinkling. But I figured a little encouragement couldn't hurt. As our colleagues swarmed around us offering congratulations, I felt overwhelmed. Jake slipped a ring onto my finger, and I stared at it, feeling a mix of elation and panic. I caught Leonard's eye across the room. He looked stricken, and in that moment I realized there was more to his feelings for me than just friendship. Jake's arm around me tightened, and he whispered in my ear, "I can't wait to start our life together, Rose, you, me, and my family." It's going to be perfect. As the impromptu party swirled around me, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. On one side was the promise of the family I'd always dreamed of. On the other, a nagging doubt that wouldn't let go. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how was I going to get out if I needed to? The whirlwind of wedding preparations swept me off my feet. Between dress fittings, venue tours, and endless decisions about flowers and centerpieces, I barely had time to breathe, let alone think about the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. One evening, as Jake and I collapsed onto the couch after another marathon planning session, he dropped a bombshell. "Honey, I've been thinking," he said, his voice casual. "What if we moved in with my parents after the wedding?" I sat up straight, my heart racing. "What? Why would we do that?" Jake shrugged. "It makes sense financially. We could save for a down payment on our own place faster. Plus, Mom and Dad would love having us around." I tried to keep the panic out of my voice. "But Jake, we're starting our life together. Don't you want some privacy?" He took my hand, his eyes earnest. "Rose, my family is everything to me. I thought you understood that. Don't you want to be part of it?" Guilt washed over me. Jake's family had been so welcoming, so loving. How could I deny them? And yet, the thought of giving up my independence made me feel physically ill. I need to think about it," I stammered. Jake's face fell. "What's there to think about? Don't you trust me?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leonard. "Hope wedding plans are going well. Miss seeing you around the office. Coffee soon?" I quickly put the phone away, feeling a pang of something. Regret? Longing? I pushed the thought aside. The next day I found myself at Jake's parents' house, ostensibly to discuss wedding details with his mother Linda. As we sat in the kitchen, surrounded by bridal magazines, she broached the subject. "Jake told us about his idea," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, Rose, we'd be so thrilled to have you here. You're already like a daughter to us." I forced a smile. "It's a big decision, Linda. I'm not sure." She waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Family takes care of family. You'll see. It'll be wonderful." Just then, Ella burst into the kitchen, her face alight with excitement. "Rose, I got in. The architecture program at State U." I jumped up, genuinely thrilled for her. "Ella, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." As we hugged, I caught Linda's eye. Her smile seemed calculating. "You see, Rose, you've already had such an impact on our Ella. Imagine how much more you could do living here." I felt trapped, cornered by their expectations, my conflicting desires. That night, as I tossed and turned in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my own life. The next morning, I arrived at work early, desperate for some peace. To my surprise, Leonard was already there, concern etched on his face. "Rose," he said softly, "what's going on? You've seemed off lately." Something in his gentle tone broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was spilling everything. The DNA test, Jake's proposal, the pressure to move in with his family. Leonard listened without judgment, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "Rose, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. You deserve to be happy. Really, truly happy, not just going along with what others want for you." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I realized I'd been so caught up in trying to please everyone else, I'd lost sight of what I truly wanted. "I need to talk to Jake," I said, standing up abruptly. "I need to be honest with him and with myself." As I headed for the door, Leonard called out, "Rose, whatever happens, I'm here for you." I nodded, my heart pounding. It was time to take control of my own story. I stood outside Jake's parents' house, my heart pounding. After my conversation with Leonard, I knew I had to confront Jake about my doubts. But as I reached for the doorbell, I heard raised voices from inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept around to the open kitchen window. "Can't believe how perfectly this is working out," Linda's voice drifted out. "Once Rose moves in, we'll have access to her entire salary." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. Jake's voice responded, sounding uncertain. "Mom, I'm not sure about this. Rose trusts us. It feels wrong to." "Don't be naive, Jake," Robert cut in. "This is our chance to finally get out of debt. Your little architect girlfriend is our ticket to financial freedom." My world tilted on its axis. The family I thought had welcomed me with open arms had been plotting to use me all along. Ella's voice piped up, "But what about Rose's career? She's so talented, and she's been helping me." Linda scoffed. Oh, please, once she's part of this family, her career will be the least of our concerns. She'll be too busy taking care of us. I stumbled back from the window, bile rising in my throat. How could I have been so blind? The warmth, the acceptance, it had all been a carefully crafted lie. In a daze, I made my way back to my car. As I drove home, my mind raced. What was I going to do? The wedding was in 2 weeks. Invitations had been sent, deposits paid. And Jake? Had he been in on this from the beginning? Back in my apartment, I paced restlessly. I couldn't marry Jake, not now. But how could I call off the wedding without revealing what I'd overheard? Would anyone even believe me? My phone buzzed incessantly, texts from Jake, Linda, Ella. I ignored them all. Instead, I found myself dialing a different number. Leonard, I need your help. His voice was steady, calming. I'm here, Rose. What do you need? Can you meet me at the courthouse tomorrow? There's something I need to do. The next morning, Leonard and I stood in line at the marriage license office. My hand shook as I filled out the cancellation form. Are you sure about this, Rose? Leonard asked gently. I nodded, fighting back tears. I have to. You didn't hear them, Leonard. They were planning to use me, to take my money. It was all a lie. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by a new anxiety. What would happen when Jake and his family found out? My phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Rose, where have you been? We've all been worried sick. I steeled myself. Jake, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the park? An hour later, I sat on a bench watching Jake approach. His face lit up when he saw me, and for a moment I almost wavered. But then I remembered the cold calculation in Linda's voice, the way they had discussed using me like I was nothing more than a means to an end. Jake, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. There's something I need to tell you. As I spoke, I saw the color drain from his face. By the time I finished, he looked like a stranger. Rose, I don't know what to say. I swear I didn't know about this. I stood up, my decision solidified. It doesn't matter, Jake. I can't be part of a family built on lies and manipulation. The wedding is off. As I walked away, leaving Jake stunned on the bench, I felt a mix of grief and relief. The fairy tale was over, but maybe now I could start writing my own story, one where I was the author of my own happiness. I stood in the driveway of Jake's family home, my suitcases at my feet. Despite everything I'd overheard, despite canceling the marriage license in secret, I found myself moving in with them. Jake had been so apologetic, swearing he knew nothing about his family's plans. He begged me to give them a chance, to let him prove his love was real. And like a fool, I agreed. Linda threw open the front door, her smile wide but her eyes calculating. Rose, darling, welcome home. I forced a smile, reminding myself this was temporary. I just needed time to figure out my next move. Jake carried my bags upstairs to what would be our room. As he set them down, he pulled me close. I'm so glad you're here, Rose. We're going to be so happy, I promise. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The first few days were a whirlwind of false cheer and thinly veiled expectations. Linda constantly hovered, asking about my work schedule, my salary, my benefits package. Robert made offhand comments about the family's financial struggles, hinting at how much my contribution would help. On the 4th night, as we sat down to dinner, Linda cleared her throat. Rose, dear, we've been thinking. Since you're part of the family now, it only makes sense for you to contribute to the household expenses. I nearly choked on my water. Excuse me? Jake squeezed my hand under the table. Mom, we talked about this. Rose just moved in. We can't. Linda waved him off. Nonsense. Rose understands, don't you, dear? Family helps family. I felt trapped, cornered. I suppose I could contribute something. Robert leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Excellent. We were thinking your entire salary would be a good start. The room spun. My entire salary? But what about my own expenses? My savings? Linda laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, Rose, you don't need to worry about that anymore. We'll take care of everything. I looked at Jake, silently pleading for him to say something. Anything. But he just stared at his plate, avoiding my gaze. Ella, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. This isn't right. You can't just take all of Rose's money. Ella, be quiet, Linda snapped. The adults are talking. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. I fled to the backyard, my mind reeling. How had I let things get this far? I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over Leonard's number. But before I could call, Jake appeared beside me. Rose, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they would ask for your entire salary. We can figure something else out. I turned to him, really looking at him for the first time since I'd moved in. Did you know, Jake, about their plans to use me? He hesitated, and in that moment I knew. The betrayal cut deep. I thought I could protect you, he whispered. I thought once we were married, I could make them see reason. I stepped back, my voice shaking. You lied to me. You're just as bad as they are. Jake reached for me, but I pushed past him, running back into the house. I needed to get out to escape this nightmare I'd willingly walked into. But as I reached the front door, Linda blocked my path. Where do you think you're going? I'm leaving, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Linda's eyes narrowed. I don't think so, dear. You see, we've already made some financial arrangements based on your contribution. You can't just walk away now. Robert appeared behind her, his face grim. You're part of this family now, Rose, for better or worse. As they closed in around me, I realized with horror that I was trapped. Not just financially, but physically. The fairy tale had become a nightmare, and I was the prisoner in the tower. In that moment, I knew I had to find a way out, no matter the cost. But how? My heart raced as I paced the confines of my room. No, my prison. It had been 3 days since Linda and Robert's ultimatum, and I felt the walls closing in. Jake had been suspiciously absent, claiming work emergencies. I knew I had to act, and fast. A soft knock on the door startled me. Rose? It's Ella. Can I come in? I hesitated, then opened the door. Ella's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant for this to happen. In that moment, I saw my way out. Ella, I need your help. Can you trust me? She nodded, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. Over the next hour, we hatched a plan. Ella would create a distraction, allowing me to access the family's financial records. If I could find proof of their schemes, I could expose them. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, Ella knocked over a vase, shattering it across the floor. As Linda and Robert rushed to clean up, I slipped into Robert's study. My hands shook as I rifled through drawers and files. Finally, I found what I was looking for: bank statements, loan documents, all pointing to a web of financial deceit. They weren't just planning to use my money, they were drowning in debt and saw me as their lifeline. I quickly snapped photos with my phone, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Just as I finished, the door creaked open. Jake stood there, his face a mask of betrayal. Rose, what are you doing? I straightened up, clutching my phone. Finding the truth, Jake. The truth you've been hiding from me. His eyes darted to the scattered papers, realization dawning. Rose, please, let me explain. Explain what? I spat. How you and your family plan to use me, to steal my money, my future? Jake reached for me, but I backed away. I love you, Rose. I thought if we got married, I could fix things, make it right. By lying to me? By trapping me in this house? Anger and hurt coursed through me. That's not love, Jake. That's manipulation. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Linda's shrill voice called out, Jake? Is everything all right? I knew it was now or never. Pushing past Jake, I ran down the stairs, nearly colliding with Linda and Robert at the bottom. What's going on? Robert demanded, his eyes narrowing as he saw my phone clutched in my hand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know everything, the debts, the schemes, all of it, and I'm leaving. Linda's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little... No! I cut her off. I'm done being manipulated. I've canceled our marriage registration, and I have proof of your financial fraud. If you try to stop me, I'll go straight to the police. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. Rose, please. I turned to him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. It's over, Jake. All of it. As I moved towards the door, Ella appeared, my packed suitcase in hand. Linda lunged for her, but Robert held her back, defeat evident in his slumped shoulders. You'll regret this, Linda hissed. You're nothing without us. I paused at the door, looking back at the family that had nearly destroyed me. No, I'm everything without you, and I'm taking my life back. With that, I stepped out into the cool night air, Ella right behind me. As we drove away, the weight of the past few months began to lift. Where will you go? Ella asked softly. I thought of Leonard, of the office, of the life I'd nearly lost. Home, I said. I'm going home. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. I had escaped, but at what cost? And what challenges lay ahead as I reclaimed my life and my identity? The office felt both familiar and strange as I walked through the doors for the first time in weeks. Whispers followed me down the hallway, but I held my head high. I'd faced worse than office gossip. Leonard was the first to approach me, concern etched on his face. "Rose, are you all right? We've all been so worried." I managed a small smile. "I'm getting there. It's been a rough few weeks." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "If you need anything, I'm here." As the days passed, I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the clean lines and precise calculations of architecture. Slowly, the whispers died down, replaced by a newfound respect from my colleagues. They'd seen me weather a storm and come out stronger. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, Leonard appeared at my door. "Rose, I'm glad you're back, and I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." Something in his voice made me look up. The care and admiration in his eyes took my breath away. How had I never noticed it before? "Thank you, Leonard," I said softly, "for everything." Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on rebuilding my career and my sense of self. Ella called occasionally, updating me on her progress in architecture school and assuring me that Jake's family was facing the consequences of their actions. Through it all, Leonard was a steady presence, offering support without pressure. Our friendship deepened, conversations flowing easily over shared lunches and late-night work sessions. It was on one such evening, as we pored over blueprints for a new project, that Leonard suddenly set down his pencil. "Rose, there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I've had feelings for you for a long time. I never said anything because, well, timing never seemed right. But after everything that's happened, I realized life's too short to stay silent." I stared at him, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Fear, excitement, hope. "Leonard," he held up a hand, "you don't have to say anything now. I know you've been through a lot. I just wanted you to know." In that moment, looking into his kind eyes, I saw a future I'd never dared to imagine before. A partnership based on mutual respect and genuine care. "Actually," I said, my voice stronger than I expected, "I do have something to say. Yes." His eyebrows shot up. "Yes?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Yes, I have feelings for you too. And yes, I'd like to see where this goes." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. We took things slow, both of us aware of the weight of our shared history and my recent experiences. But with each passing day, I felt more certain that this was right. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Leonard and I stood on the rooftop garden of our latest project. The city lights twinkled below us, a testament to the beauty we'd created together. Leonard turned to me, his eyes shining. "Rose, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You're not just my partner in work, but in every aspect of life. I can't imagine a future without you by my side." My breath caught as he dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Rose Thompson, will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I looked at the man before me. A man who had stood by me through my darkest times, who valued me for who I was, not what I could give him. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Leonard slipped the ring on my finger and pulled me into an embrace, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to a love built on trust, respect, and genuine partnership. I had lost a false fairy tale, but gained something far more precious. A real, enduring love story of my own. I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, eyeing my reflection in the full-length mirror. The ivory silk clung to my curves, a perfect fit for tomorrow's wedding. My wedding. The thought still made my stomach flutter with excitement and nerves. "Sophie, you ready to go?" Dylan's voice called from the living room. "Just a minute." I gave myself one last look, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. This was it. The night before our big day, dinner at Dylan's parents' house with both our families, a chance to bask in the love and support of those closest to us. I stepped out of the bedroom to find Dylan adjusting his tie. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Wow," he breathed, "you look stunning." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Even after 3 years together, his compliments still made me feel like a schoolgirl with a crush. Thanks. You don't look so bad yourself. Dylan pulled me close, planting a soft kiss on my lips. Ready to face the family circus? I laughed, grateful for his humor, as ready as I'll ever be. As we headed for the door, Dylan's phone buzzed on the side table. He glanced at it, a flicker of something, worry, annoyance, crossing his face. Everything okay? I asked. He pocketed the phone quickly. Yeah, just work stuff, nothing important. I nodded, pushing aside a nagging feeling. Dylan had been working late a lot recently, claiming a big project was keeping him busy. But tonight was about us, about family. I wouldn't let work worries intrude. The drive to his parents' house was filled with easy chatter about last-minute wedding details. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw my sister Teresa's car already parked. Looks like we're the last to arrive, Dylan said, killing the engine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I loved my family. I truly did. But gatherings like this always left me feeling less than, especially with Teresa around. My older sister had always been the golden child, effortlessly charming and beautiful. Next to her, I often felt invisible. Dylan squeezed my hand. Hey, you okay? I forced a smile. Of course. Let's go in. The moment we stepped through the door, we were engulfed in a whirlwind of hugs and exclamations. Dylan's mom, Harriet, pulled me into a warm embrace. Oh, Sophie, dear, you look lovely, she gushed. Thanks, Harriet, something smells amazing. I said, catching a whiff of roast chicken. That would be my famous herb-roasted chicken, she beamed. Dylan's favorite. From the corner of my eye, I saw Teresa saunter over. She looked stunning as always in a form-fitting red dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. Little sis, she exclaimed, air-kissing my cheeks. That dress is darling on you. I'm so glad you took my advice about the neckline. I bristled inwardly at her backhanded compliment but plastered on a smile. Thanks, Teresa. You look great, too. As everyone moved to the dining room, I noticed Dylan hanging back, fiddling with his phone again. When he saw me watching, he quickly pocketed it and flashed a smile. Everything okay? I asked again. Of course, he said, a little too brightly. Just making sure I turned off notifications. Tonight's all about family, right? I nodded, but that nagging feeling was back, stronger now. As we took our seats at the table, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Dinner progressed with the usual mix of reminiscing, gentle teasing, and wedding talk. I tried to focus on the conversation, on the warmth of family gathered together, but my mind kept drifting to Dylan's strange behavior. As Harriet cleared the plates for dessert, Dylan excused himself to use the bathroom. His phone, left on the table, buzzed with an incoming text. Before I could stop myself, I glanced at the screen. My heart stopped. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, our special day. Love, T." T. Teresa? In that moment, my world tilted on its axis. The chatter around me faded to a dull roar, as one thought blazed through my mind. What have I stumbled into? I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white as I struggled to process what I'd just seen. The text message from Teresa to Dylan burned in my mind, mocking everything I thought I knew about my relationship, my family, my life. Sophie? Are you all right, dear? My mother's voice cut through the fog of shock. You look pale. I forced a smile, my heart hammering. I'm fine, Mom, just a bit overwhelmed with all the wedding excitement, I guess. Dylan returned, sliding into his seat beside me. His hand found mine under the table, a gesture that used to comfort me. Now it made my skin crawl. Everything okay, babe? He asked, his voice low and concerned. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could he sit there playing the doting fiancé when he was betraying me with my own sister? As dessert was served, I watched Dylan and Teresa like a hawk. The little glances, the way Teresa's laugh seemed to linger a beat too long at Dylan's jokes. How had I been so blind? So, Teresa, my father boomed, any prospects on the horizon for you? Can't let your little sister beat you to the altar, can you? Teresa's tinkling laugh grated on my nerves. Oh, Daddy, you know me. I'm just having too much fun to settle down. That's our Teresa, Mom chimed in, her voice warm with pride. Always the life of the party. I bit back a bitter retort. Of course, perfect Teresa could do no wrong, even if she was stealing her sister's fiancé. As the evening wore on, I felt like I was suffocating. Every loving glance from Dylan, every casual touch from Teresa, It all felt like a cruel charade. Finally, as we were saying our goodbyes, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed air, needed space to think. "I'm just going to step outside for a moment," I mumbled, slipping away from the group. The cool night air hit my face as I stumbled onto the porch, gulping in deep breaths. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Was our entire relationship a lie? Sophie? Teresa's voice made me stiffen. "Are you okay? You've been acting strange all night." I turned to face her, searching her features for any sign of guilt or remorse. But all I saw was the same confident, beautiful sister I'd always known and always felt inferior to. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "Just wedding jitters, I guess." Teresa's laugh was light, carefree. "Oh, sweetie, there's nothing to worry about. Dylan adores you. You two are perfect together." The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, ready to confront her, to demand the truth. But at that moment, Dylan appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said, smiling at us both. "Ready to head home, Sophie?" I looked between them, these two people I thought I knew so well. The betrayal cut deep, but a new emotion was rising within me. Anger. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think I'll stay and help your mom clean up, Dylan. Why don't you give Teresa a ride home? I'm sure you two have plenty to talk about." A flicker of panic crossed Dylan's face, quickly masked. "Are you sure? It's no trouble to wait." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Go on. I'll see you at home." As I watched them leave together, a plan began to form in my mind. They thought they could play me for a fool, but they had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow wasn't going to be the wedding day they expected. Not by a long shot. I turned back to the house, a grim smile on my face. It was time to start gathering evidence. The truth would come out, and when it did, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who Teresa and Dylan really were. Let the games begin. I paced our apartment like a caged animal, waiting for Dylan to return. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the accusations I needed to hurl. The clock ticked away the minutes, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, I heard the key in the lock. Dylan stumbled in, his tie loosened, and a sheepish grin on his face. "Hey, babe," he slurred. "Sorry I'm late. Teresa and I got to talking, and—" "Save it," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through his drunken haze. "I know everything, Dylan." He blinked, confusion clouding his features. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed his phone from the coffee table, waving it in his face. "I saw the messages, Dylan. I know about you and Teresa." The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly pallor. "Sophie, I can explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, my composure finally shattering. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with my sister? How you've been lying to me for God knows how long." Dylan reached for me, but I recoiled from his touch. "It's not what you think," he pleaded. "Teresa and I, we just connected. But I love you, Sophie. I want to marry you." His words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. "How dare you?" I hissed. "How dare you stand there and claim to love me while you're sleeping with my sister?" "It was a mistake," Dylan insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "A moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "A moment of weakness? The text I saw suggested otherwise. This isn't just a fling, is it? You two have been planning something." Dylan's face contorted, a mix of guilt and frustration. "You don't understand. Teresa, she's different. She gets me in a way you never could." The words hit me like a physical blow. All the years of feeling second best to Teresa came rushing back, a tidal wave of insecurity and pain. "Get out," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and hurt. "Sophie, please." "Get out," I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a framed photo of us, and hurling it at him. It shattered against the wall, a fitting metaphor for our relationship. Dylan stumbled back, shock written across his face. "You're overreacting. We can work this out. Think about the wedding, about our families." "Our families?" I laughed hysterically. "You mean the family that's always favored Teresa? The family that's going to side with her, just like they always have?" As the words left my mouth, a chilling realization washed over me. They would side with Teresa. My parents, our friends, they'd all believe her version of events. Sweet, perfect Teresa, who could do no wrong. Dylan must have seen the change in my expression because he stepped forward, his voice taking on a manipulative tone. "See? You know I'm right. We can get past this, Sophie. For the sake of our families, for our future. Don't throw it all away over a misunderstanding. For a moment I wavered. The thought of facing everyone, of admitting that once again Teresa had bested me, was almost too much to bear. But then I remembered the text, the secret smiles, the years of lies. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We're done, Dylan. The wedding's off. I yanked my engagement ring off, flinging it at his feet. Tell Teresa she can have you. You deserve each other. Dylan's face darkened. You'll regret this, Sophie. You're nothing without me, without your family. Who's going to believe you over Teresa? His words meant to wound, ignited something in me. A fierce determination I didn't know I possessed. Get out, I said one last time, my voice cold and hard, and tell Teresa to watch her back. This isn't over. As the door slammed behind him, I sank to the floor, tears finally breaking free. But beneath the sorrow, a plan was forming. They thought they could walk all over me, that I'd just roll over and take it like always. Not this time. This time I was going to fight back. And God help anyone who stood in my way. I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, a single suitcase at my feet. The bare walls and empty rooms echoed with possibility and loneliness. This wasn't how I'd imagined starting my new life, but here I was, 35 and starting over. A gentle knock startled me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Hello, dear. I'm Clara from next door. I saw you moving in and thought you might like some company. And some homemade lasagna. I felt tears prick my eyes at this simple act of kindness. That's so thoughtful. I'm Sophie. Please come in. As we sat at my makeshift dining table, a cardboard box, Clara's warmth drew out my story. I found myself pouring out everything. Dylan's betrayal, Teresa's manipulation, my family's blind spots. Clara listened intently, her weathered hand covering mine. Oh, honey, you've been through the ringer, but you're stronger than you know. Her words were a balm to my battered spirit. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Now, Clara said, her eyes twinkling, tell me about this sister of yours. Has she always been the favorite? The question transported me back to childhood memories I'd long suppressed. Teresa, golden and perfect, always the center of attention. Me, forever in her shadow. I remember when I was 10, I began, the words tumbling out. I'd worked for weeks on a science project. The night before the fair, Teresa knocked it over accidentally. Instead of being upset, my parents praised her for helping me rebuild it. She got all the credit at the fair. Clara shook her head. Some people thrive on that kind of attention, even if it means stepping on others. That's Teresa in a nutshell, I agreed. But stealing my fiancé, that's a new low, even for her. A determined glint appeared in Clara's eye. Well, it's high time you stood up for yourself, Sophie. Have you considered digging deeper into Teresa's past? People like that often leave a trail of destruction. Her suggestion sparked something in me. I grabbed my laptop, fingers flying over the keys as I searched social media, old news articles, anything I could find about Teresa. What I uncovered left me reeling. Teresa's perfect life was anything but. There were hints of affairs, suspicious job changes, even a restraining order from an ex-boyfriend. But the most shocking discovery was a series of posts from my cousin Megan, dated 3 years ago. I can't believe Teresa would stoop so low, Megan had written. Stealing your sister's boyfriend is one thing, but marrying him? Sophie deserves to know the truth. My hands shook as I pieced it together. 3 years ago, I'd been dating Mark. We'd been serious, talking about a future together. Then suddenly, he'd broken things off. Months later, Teresa had introduced her new husband, Mark, to the family. I'd been devastated, but had eventually moved on, meeting Dylan. Now history was repeating itself. Oh my God, I whispered, showing Clara the posts. She's done this before. She stole my boyfriend, married him, and I never knew. Clara's face hardened. That's beyond sibling rivalry, Sophie. That's calculated cruelty. A cold determination settled over me. I need to confront her. Both of them. They can't keep getting away with this. Be careful, Clara warned. People like that can be dangerous when cornered. You need a plan. I nodded, my mind already racing. You're right. I can't just rush in. I need to be smart about this. As the sun set outside my new apartment, Clara and I began to strategize. For the first time since discovering Dylan's betrayal, I felt a sense of purpose. Teresa thinks she's won, I said, a steely edge to my voice. But she has no idea what's coming. This ends now. Clara squeezed my hand. That's the spirit, dear. Show them who you really are. As Clara left, promising to check in tomorrow, I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. I was done being the victim. Done letting Teresa and others like her walk all over me. It was time to fight back. And this time, I wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by a web of papers, sticky notes, and my laptop. Clara's words echoed in my mind. Be smart about this. For days I'd been piecing to Teresa's past, uncovering a pattern of deception that made my blood boil. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Angie, my best friend, her face etched with concern. Sophie, I came as soon as I could. What's going on? Your texts were cryptic. I ushered her in, grateful for her presence. Angie, you're not going to believe what I've discovered. Over the next hour, I laid out everything. Dylan's betrayal, Teresa's history of stealing boyfriends, and my plan to expose them both. Angie's eyes widened. Sophie, this is intense. Are you sure you want to go through with this? It could tear your family apart. I felt a flicker of doubt, but pushed it aside. They tore the family apart when they betrayed me. Twice. I'm just bringing the truth to light. Angie nodded slowly. Okay, I'm with you. What's the plan? I pulled out a detailed timeline I'd created. There's a family reunion next month at Dylan's parents' house. Everyone will be there. I'm going to expose them in front of everyone. As I explained my strategy, involving carefully gathered evidence and timed revelations, Angie's expression shifted from concern to admiration. You've really thought this through, she said. But Sophie, what about after? Have you considered the fallout? I hesitated. The truth was, I hadn't thought much beyond the moment of exposure. The idea of facing my family, of dealing with the aftermath, made my stomach churn. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Clara poked her head in, a plate of cookies in hand. I thought you girls might need some sustenance for your planning session. As Clara settled in, bringing her wisdom to our discussion, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Sophie, we need to talk. Your father and I are worried about you. Teresa says you've been making wild accusations. Please come home so we can sort this out. I showed the text to Angie and Clara, my hands shaking. See, they're already taking her side. They always do. Clara patted my hand. Remember, dear, this isn't just about your family anymore. It's about standing up for yourself. Angie nodded in agreement. She's right, Soph. You can't back down now. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. You're both right. I'm going to respond, but not the way they expect. I typed out a reply. Mom, I'll be there. But be prepared. There's a lot you don't know, and it's time for the truth to come out. As I hit send, a wave of determination washed over me. This ends now, I said, my voice steady. I'm going to Dylan's parents' house tomorrow. I can't wait for the reunion. They need to know what kind of person their son really is. Clara's eyes widened. Are you sure that's wise, dear? Going into the lion's den unprepared? I nodded, a plan already forming. I'm more prepared than they could ever imagine. Angie, can you come with me? I could use the support. Angie squeezed my hand. Of course, I wouldn't miss it. As we finalized the details, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow, I would confront not just Dylan and Teresa, but years of being overlooked and undervalued. Clara hugged me tightly before leaving. Remember, Sophie, the truth is your armor. Wear it proudly. That night, as I lay in bed, I imagined all the possible outcomes of tomorrow's confrontation. But one thing was certain. Win or lose, I was done being a doormat. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my voice, my dignity, and my future. As dawn broke, I rose, determination coursing through my veins. Today was the day everything would change. I only hoped I was ready for whatever came next. My heart pounded as Angie and I approached Dylan's parents' house. The familiar driveway, once a symbol of family and belonging, now felt like enemy territory. I clutched my folder of evidence, my lifeline in the storm I was about to unleash. You ready for this? Angie whispered, squeezing my hand. I nodded, steeling myself, as ready as I'll ever be. The door opened before we could knock, revealing Dylan's mother, Harriet. Her eyes widened in surprise. Sophie, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right? No, Harriet, it's not, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But it will be once the truth comes out. Is everyone here? Confusion clouded her features as she ushered us in. In the living room, I found my worst fears confirmed. Dylan and Teresa sat side by side on the couch, their proximity speaking volumes. My parents were there too, along with Dylan's father, Walter. The room fell silent as I entered. Dylan stood abruptly, his face a mask of panic. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" I ignored him, addressing the room at large. "I'm here because it's time everyone knew the truth about Dylan, about Teresa, and about the lies that have been tearing this family apart for years." My mother's face paled. "Sophie, what are you talking about? Teresa said you've been making wild accusations." "Of course she did," I cut in, my voice sharp. "Teresa's been manipulating all of you for years, and it stops today." I opened my folder, pulling out printed emails, text messages, and photos. "Did you know that Teresa and Dylan have been having an affair? Not just now, but 3 years ago, when I was dating Mark?" Gasps echoed around the room. Teresa jumped up, her face contorted with rage. "You're lying. How dare you come here and spread these vicious rumors?" But I was done being silenced. I turned to my parents, my voice breaking. "Mom, do you remember when Mark suddenly broke up with me? It wasn't because of work stress like Teresa told you. It was because she seduced him, just like she's done with Dylan." I handed them the evidence, watching as their expressions shifted from disbelief to horror. Dylan's parents looked shell-shocked, staring at their son with newfound disappointment. Dylan made a desperate lunge for the papers, but Angie intercepted him. "Don't even think about it," she warned. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Teresa, you've always been the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. But do you want to know why? Because you've manipulated everyone around you, stealing opportunities, boyfriends, and even husbands to make yourself look better." Teresa's composure cracked. "You don't understand. I never meant to hurt you, Sophie. I couldn't stand seeing you happy when I was so miserable." Her admission hung in the air, heavy with years of resentment and jealousy. I turned to Dylan, my voice ice cold. "And you? You were willing to marry me while carrying on with my sister. How long did you think you could keep this charade going?" Dylan's face crumpled. "Sophie, please, we can work this out. I love you. Save it," I snapped. "Your actions speak louder than your words ever could." As the full weight of the revelations settled over the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Years of pent-up emotions and unspoken truths had finally been released. My father, his voice thick with emotion, broke the silence. "Sophie, we had no idea. All these years we thought—" "You thought Teresa could do no wrong," I finished for him, "and that I was just being oversensitive or jealous. Well, now you know the truth." The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew, tears fell, and years of family dynamics unraveled before my eyes. In the midst of it all, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. But as I watched my family, both families, grapple with the fallout of my revelations, a new fear gripped me. What would be left when the dust settled? Had I just destroyed the very relationships I had been fighting to save? As Dylan made one last desperate plea and Teresa collapsed into sobs, I realized that this was far from over. The truth was out, but the real battle, the fight to rebuild and heal, was only just beginning. The days following my revelation at Dylan's parents' house were a blur of heated phone calls, tearful confrontations, and sleepless nights. I'd unleashed a tsunami of truth, and now I was struggling to stay afloat in its wake. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone as it buzzed incessantly with messages from family members and friends. Each notification felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain of betrayal. A gentle knock at the door startled me. It was Clara, her kind eyes filled with concern. "Sophie, dear, you haven't left your apartment in days. How are you holding up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "How am I holding up? I've torn my family apart, Clara. I thought exposing the truth would make everything better, but it's only made things worse." Clara settled beside me on the couch, her weathered hand covering mine. "The truth often hurts before it heals, Sophie. Give it time." Just then my phone rang. It was my mother. With a deep breath, I answered. "Sophie," her voice was strained, "we need to talk. Can you come over? Your father and we owe you an apology." My heart raced as I agreed. An hour later, I found myself standing in my childhood home, facing my parents across the kitchen table. The air was thick with unspoken words and years of misunderstandings. "We had no idea," my father began, his voice heavy with regret. "All these years we thought Teresa was just more outgoing, more successful. We never realized the extent of her manipulation. My mother reached for my hand. Sophie, can you ever forgive us for being so blind? Tears welled in my eyes. This was the validation I'd craved for so long, but it felt hollow in the face of everything that had happened. I don't know, I admitted. I love you both, but the damage, it's not something that can be fixed overnight. As we talked, years of pent-up emotions poured out. It was painful, but cathartic. For the first time, I felt truly seen by my parents. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. We rushed to the window to see Dylan on the front lawn, looking disheveled and desperate. Sophie, he called out. Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything. My father moved to confront him, but I held him back. No, Dad, I need to handle this myself. I stepped outside, my newfound strength propelling me forward. There's nothing to explain, Dylan. Your actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Dylan's face crumpled. But I love you, Sophie. Teresa, she manipulated me, just like she did everyone else. We can still make this work. For a moment, I wavered. The old Sophie, desperate for love and acceptance, wanted to believe him, but then I remembered everything. The lies, the betrayals, the years of being second best. No, Dylan, I said firmly. We can't. What you and Teresa did, it's unforgivable. I deserve better than either of you. As I turned to go back inside, I saw Teresa's car pull up. My sister stepped out, her usual poise replaced by genuine remorse. Sophie, wait, she called out. I know I've done terrible things, but please, you're my sister. We can't let this destroy our family. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, hurt, and a tiny flicker of love for the sister I once knew. But I stood my ground. You destroyed our family long ago, Teresa. With every lie, every manipulation, I'm done being your victim. As I walked back into the house, leaving Dylan and Teresa on the lawn, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. I'd lost my fiancé, my sister, and the family I thought I had. But I'd gained something far more valuable, self-respect and the truth. Inside, my parents waited, their faces a mix of pride and concern. What now? My mother asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future on my shoulders. Now we rebuild. If you're willing to try, so am I. As we embraced, I realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it head-on. The old Sophie was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth and was no longer afraid to claim it. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when I confronted Dylan and Teresa. The wounds were still fresh, but slowly healing. I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, ready to embark on the next chapter of my life. Clara knocked on my open door, a warm smile on her face. Ready for your housewarming party, dear? I took a deep breath, nodding. As ready as I'll ever be. As guests began to arrive, Angie, my parents, even a few colleagues from work, I felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who had stood by me through the darkest days, helping me rebuild my life piece by piece. My mother hugged me tightly. Sophie, we're so proud of you, she whispered. You've shown such strength. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was stronger, more honest than ever before. As the party was in full swing, there was another knock at the door. I opened it to find Teresa standing there, looking uncertain. Sophie, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, she began. I felt a flicker of the old pain, but it was duller now. Teresa, Please, let me say this, she interrupted. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I want you to know how sorry I am, for everything. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. Thank you for saying that, Teresa. I can't forgive you yet, but maybe someday. As Teresa left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was mine to shape. Returning to the party, I found myself drawn into a conversation with Greg, a friend of Angie's I'd met a few weeks ago. His kind eyes and easy laugh made me feel at ease. So, Sophie, he said, Angie tells me you're starting your own business? I nodded, excitement bubbling up. Yes, a small consulting firm. It's scary, but exhilarating. I know the feeling, Greg replied. I started my own company a few years ago. It's not easy, but it's worth it. As we talked, I felt a spark of connection. Not the whirlwind romance I'd had with Dylan, but something steadier, more grounded. Later, as the party wound down, Clara pulled me aside. Sophie, look at you. You're glowing, dear. I smiled, realizing she was right. For the first time in months, I felt truly happy. I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. Your wisdom, your support, it meant everything. Clara patted my hand. You had the strength inside you all along, Sophie. You just needed to believe in yourself. As the last guest left, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights. I thought about how far I'd come, from the heartbroken woman who discovered her fiancé's betrayal to the strong, independent person I was today. The road hadn't been easy. There were still days when the pain of betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. But I had learned to face it head-on, to draw strength from the experience rather than let it defeat me. I thought about Teresa, about the long journey of healing that lay ahead for our family. I thought about Dylan, hoping he had learned from his mistakes. And I thought about Greg, wondering if perhaps there was a new chapter waiting to be written there. But most of all, I thought about myself. The Sophie who had emerged from the ashes of betrayal was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. As I closed the balcony door and turned back to my new home, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to face it. I had lost a fiancé and a sister, but I had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, true friendships, and a deep understanding of my own worth. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning, and I couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring. I glanced at my phone, frowning at the caller ID. Patricia. My mother-in-law rarely called, especially not at this hour. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Patricia. Is everything all right? Alexis, dear, I'm sorry to bother you, but have you noticed anything strange about Bill lately? I paused, caught off guard. Strange? What do you mean? Oh, I don't know. He's been so distant lately, barely returns my calls, and when he does, he seems distracted. I walked to the kitchen window, peering out at our manicured lawn. The sprinklers kicked on, misting the air. I haven't noticed anything unusual. He's been working late, but that's normal this time of year. Patricia sighed heavily. I suppose. It's just, a mother knows when something's off with her child. I'm sure it's nothing, I said, more to reassure myself than her. But I'll keep an eye out. Is there anything specific you're worried about? There was a long pause on the other end. Well, it's probably nothing, but I overheard him on the phone the other day. He was speaking in hushed tones, and when I came into the room, he hung up abruptly. My stomach tightened. Who was he talking to? He said it was work, but Alexis, I think it was Clara. I nearly dropped the phone. Clara? His cousin Clara? Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I heard him say her name. My mind raced. Bill and Clara had always been close, but they drifted apart after our wedding. Why would he be calling her in secret? Patricia, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe they're planning a surprise for you? She laughed bitterly. At my age? Doubtful. No, something's not right. I can feel it in my bones. Just then, I heard the garage door opening. Patricia, Bill's home. I should go. Try not to worry, okay? I'll talk to him. I hung up and busied myself at the kitchen counter, trying to calm my racing heart. Bill walked in, loosening his tie. Hey, honey. How was your day? I asked, keeping my voice light. He shrugged, heading for the fridge. Same old. Yours? Fine. Oh, your mom called. Bill stiffened almost imperceptibly. Yeah? What'd she want? I studied his face carefully. She's worried about you. Says you've been distant lately. He rolled his eyes. Mom's always worried about something. I've just been busy with work. She mentioned overhearing you on the phone. Thought she heard you talking to Clara. Bill's jaw clenched. That's ridiculous. I haven't spoken to Clara in years. Are you sure? Because your mom seemed pretty certain. He slammed the fridge door shut. Jesus, Alexis. What is this, an interrogation? My mother's paranoid, and now you're buying into it? I took a step back, startled by his outburst. I'm just telling you what she said, no need to get defensive. Bill ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I'm sorry, I'm just stressed from work. Look, I've got a big presentation tomorrow. I need to go over some notes. He brushed past me, heading for his office. I watched him go, a knot forming in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Later that night, I lay awake, Bill's steady breathing beside me. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. A mother knows when something's off with her child. I turned to look at my husband's sleeping face. Did I know him as well as I thought I did? Or was there a side to Bill I'd never seen? As sleep finally claimed me, one thought lingered. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. Bill had left early for his presentation, barely saying goodbye. I found myself staring at the phone, debating whether to call Patricia. Finally, I dialed her number. "Alexis, is everything all right?" Patricia's voice was laced with concern. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Can we meet for coffee? There's a lot I need to ask you." An hour later, I sat across from Patricia at our local cafe, watching her stir her latte absently. She looked tired, worry lines etched deeply around her eyes. "Tell me everything," I said softly. "About Bill, about Clara. I need to know what's going on." Patricia sighed heavily. "It started about 6 months ago. Bill began calling less, making excuses not to visit. When he did come over, he was distracted, always checking his phone." My heart sank. 6 months. How had I not noticed? "And Clara?" I prompted. Patricia's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. I overheard him on the phone with her 3 times now, always speaking in hushed tones, always hanging up when I entered the room. What were they talking about? I couldn't make out much, but... Patricia hesitated. "One time I heard him say, 'I miss you too. We'll figure something out.'" The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped my coffee cup tightly, trying to steady myself. "There's more," Patricia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last month I saw Clara at the grocery store. She was different, glowing almost. And Alexa, she was wearing a necklace I recognized. It was my grandmother's pendant, the one I gave to Bill on his 18th birthday. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you sure?" Patricia nodded grimly. "Positive. I confronted Bill about it later, but he brushed it off, said he must have misplaced it years ago." My mind was reeling. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the sudden distance between us. It all started to make a horrifying kind of sense. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to believe it myself. I hoped I was imagining things, that if I didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be real. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I understand, but Patricia, we need to know for sure. We can't just sit back and let this happen." She nodded, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm going to dig deeper, check his emails, his phone records, anything I can find. If there's proof, we'll find it." "And if there is?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling. I met her gaze, feeling a surge of anger and resolve. "Then we make them pay, both of them." As we left the cafe, my phone buzzed. A text from Bill. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I showed it to Patricia, who shook her head in disgust. "He's with her right now, isn't he?" The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Probably," I managed to choke out. Patricia pulled me into a fierce hug. "We'll get through this, Alexis. Together." As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, betrayal, fear, but also a grim determination. Bill and Clara thought they could fool us, destroy our family without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I climbed into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. It was time to hunt for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. And when I found it, there would be hell to pay. I paced the living room, rehearsing what I'd say to Bill when he got home. The clock ticked past midnight, each second fueling my anger. Finally, I heard his key in the lock. "Hey," Bill said, looking surprised to see me awake. "I thought you'd be in bed." "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." I crossed my arms. "What's going on with you and Clara?" Bill froze, his face a mask of shock before he quickly composed himself. "Clara? What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Bill. Your mother heard you on the phone with her, multiple times." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Mom's imagining things. You know how she gets." "Is she?" I pressed. "Because she saw Clara wearing your grandmother's pendant, the one you said you lost." Bill's face darkened. "Has my mother been filling your head with these ridiculous stories?" "Alexis, come on. You know me better than that." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to, but the doubt had taken root, and I couldn't shake it. "Then explain the late nights, the secretive phone calls. Explain why you've been so distant lately." I told you, work has been crazy. These accusations are insane. Clara's my cousin, for Christ's sake. His anger seemed genuine, but something still felt off. I decided to push harder. Prove it, I said. Show me your phone. Let me see your call history, your texts. Bill's eyes widened. What? No, that's a complete invasion of privacy. I can't believe you don't trust me. If you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? He threw up his hands. The problem is my wife acting like a paranoid lunatic. Listen to yourself, Alexis. This isn't you. Tears stung my eyes. You're right. This isn't me, but I don't feel like I know you anymore either. Bill's expression softened. He stepped closer, reaching for me. Honey, I love you. Only you. Whatever your mother-in-law thinks she heard or saw, she's wrong. I would never cheat on you, especially not with Clara. I wanted to fall into his arms to believe every word, but the seed of doubt had grown into a thorny vine, wrapping around my heart. I need some time, I said, stepping back. I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight. Hurt flashed across Bill's face, quickly replaced by anger. Fine, if that's what you want, but this conversation isn't over. He stormed off, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. What if I was wrong? What if Patricia's suspicions were just the paranoid imaginings of a lonely old woman? But then I remembered the look on Bill's face when I mentioned Clara. The way he refused to show me his phone, the months of distance between us. No. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what. I crept upstairs, pausing outside the guest room. I could hear Bill's muffled voice through the door. He was on the phone. I know, it's complicated. No, she doesn't know anything for sure. We just need to be more careful. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. I pressed my ear closer to the door. I'll figure something out, I promise. I love you too. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, barely making it to our bedroom before collapsing on the bed. It was true. All of it. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I made a decision. No more confrontations. No more asking for the truth. It was time to take matters into my own hands. If Bill wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. Let the hunt begin. The next morning, I waited until Bill left for work before springing into action. My hands shook as I booted up his laptop, grateful he'd never changed the password I'd set up years ago. This felt wrong, invasive, but I needed answers. I started with his email, scanning through countless work messages and junk mail. Nothing suspicious. Then I noticed a folder labeled Personal Projects. My heart raced as I clicked it open. There, buried among innocuous files, was an email thread with Clara. I took a deep breath and began to read. Bill, we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Alexis or the kids. I know, but I can't imagine my life without you. We'll figure something out, I promise. Maybe we should tell them the truth. It's been months. My vision blurred with tears. Months. They'd been carrying on this affair for months, right under my nose. I kept scrolling, each message twisting the knife deeper. Plans for secret rendezvous, declarations of love, discussions about their future together. It was all there, in black and white. Then I saw it. An email from last week with an attachment. I clicked it open, my breath catching in my throat. It was a receipt for a diamond ring. The room spun around me. Bill was planning to leave me, to start a new life with Clara. How could I have been so blind? I printed out the emails, my hands moving on autopilot. Then I deleted the folder and cleared the browser history. Bill couldn't know I'd seen this, not yet. I called Patricia, my voice barely above a whisper. You were right. About everything. Oh, Alexis, she sighed. I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? I stared at the stack of damning emails on the desk. I don't know, but I can't confront him yet. I need time to think. Of course, dear. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. As I hung up, a notification pinged on my phone, a text from Bill. Working late again, don't wait up. Rage boiled inside me. No more lies, no more secrets. It was time to see this affair with my own eyes. I called our neighbor, asking her to watch the kids for a few hours. Then I got in my car and drove to Bill's office. His car wasn't in the parking lot. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to decide what to do next. Where would they meet? A hotel? Clara's place? Then I remembered something from the emails, a mention of a special spot by the lake. It was worth a shot. I drove to the secluded area, my heart pounding. As I rounded a bend, I saw them. Bill's car, parked next to another I didn't recognize. I killed the engine and crept closer, staying hidden behind the trees. And there they were, standing by the water's edge. Bill and Clara, locked in an embrace. I wanted to scream, to run out and confront them, but something held me back. This was the proof I needed, but it wasn't enough. Not for what I had planned. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, my hands surprisingly steady. Then I retreated to my car, unseen. As I drove home, a cold determination settled over me. No more tears, no more doubts. Bill and Clara thought they could destroy our family and get away with it. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I pulled into our driveway, my mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't enough to just confront them. No, they needed to feel the full weight of their betrayal, to experience the same public humiliation they'd subjected me to. I smiled grimly as a plan began to take shape. Patricia had mentioned a family reunion coming up. What better place for a grand revelation? It was time to start planning my revenge. And when I was done, Bill and Clara would regret ever crossing me. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with the images of Bill and Clara by the lake. As dawn broke, I found myself back at Bill's laptop, driven by a desperate need to understand the full extent of their betrayal. This time, I dug deeper, searching through hidden folders and archived messages. What I found shattered any remaining hope I had of salvaging our marriage. There, in a password-protected file, was a detailed plan for their future together. Bank statements showing large transfers to a joint account, property listings for houses in another state, and most devastating of all, a draft of divorce papers with my name on them. My hands shook as I read through their exchanges, each word a dagger to my heart. "I can't wait to start our new life together, away from all this," Clara had written. Bill's response made me physically ill. "Soon, my love. Once everything's in place, we'll tell Alexis and be free." Free, as if I was some kind of prison he needed to escape from. I printed everything, adding it to the growing pile of evidence. As I stared at the stack of papers, something inside me snapped. The hurt and betrayal crystallized into a cold, hard rage. I picked up my phone and dialed Patricia's number. "Alexis? What's wrong?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "I need to see you," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. "Now." An hour later, we sat at Patricia's kitchen table, the evidence spread out before us. I watched as she read through it all, her face growing paler with each page. "My God," she whispered, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "Alexis, I'm so sorry. I never imagined it was this bad." I nodded, my jaw clenched. They were planning to leave, to start a new life together and leave us all behind. Patricia reached out, clasping my hand. "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I want them to pay. Not just Bill and Clara, but everyone who knew and kept quiet. They all betrayed us, Patricia. They made fools of us." She nodded slowly, a fierce light coming into her eyes. "The family reunion. It's in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there." A grim smile spread across my face. "Perfect. We'll expose them in front of everyone they've lied to. Let them feel the humiliation they've put us through." Patricia squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this, Alexis? Once we do this, there's no going back." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I'm sure. They don't get to just walk away from this. They need to face the consequences of their actions." We spent the next hour plotting, our heads bent together over the kitchen table. As the plan took shape, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction growing inside me. Just as we were finishing up, my phone buzzed. A text from Bill. "Hey, honey, running late again. Don't wait up." I showed it to Patricia, who shook her head in disgust. The nerve of him. I stood up, gathering the evidence. "I should get back. I need to act normal until the reunion." Patricia walked me to the door, pulling me into a tight hug. "Stay strong, Alexis. We'll get through this together." As I drove home, my mind was clear for the first time in weeks. The path ahead was set. In 2 weeks, Bill and Clara's perfect little world would come crashing down around them. I pulled into our driveway, noting Bill's car was still gone. Probably still with her, I thought bitterly. But as I walked into our house, the home we'd built together, filled with memories now tainted, I made a solemn vow. This would be the last night I spent under the same roof as a liar and a cheat. The last night I played the role of the oblivious, devoted wife. In 2 weeks, everything would change, and I would emerge from the ashes of this betrayal stronger than ever. Let the countdown begin. The 2 weeks leading up to the family reunion were the longest of my life. Every moment felt like walking on eggshells, pretending everything was normal while rage simmered just beneath the surface. Bill, oblivious to my knowledge, continued his charade of late nights and work emergencies. Patricia and I spoke daily, fine-tuning our plan. We decided to make a presentation at the reunion, ostensibly to celebrate Bill's recent promotion. In reality, it would be the stage for his downfall. The night before the reunion, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Bill's steady breathing beside me made my skin crawl. How many times had he lied to my face, then crawled into this bed we shared? Morning came, and with it a surge of nervous energy. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel powerful. As I applied my makeup, I caught Bill's appreciative glance in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "Ready for the big day?" I forced a smile. "More than you know." The drive to Patricia's sprawling estate was tense. Bill chatted about work, about how excited he was to see everyone. I nodded at the right moments, my mind focused on the USB drive and my purse containing all the evidence. As we pulled up, I saw Clara's car already parked in the driveway. My stomach clenched. "Look who beat us here," Bill said, a little too casually. I bit back a bitter laugh. What a surprise. The reunion was in full swing when we arrived. Family members I hadn't seen in years greeted us warmly. I watched as Bill and Clara carefully avoided each other, stealing glances when they thought no one was looking. Patricia found me by the punch bowl, her eyes questioning. I nodded slightly. It was time. She clinked her glass, calling for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here to celebrate Bill's recent success at work. Alexis and I have prepared a little presentation. Bill, Clara, why don't you come up front?" I saw a flicker of panic cross Bill's face, quickly masked. Clara looked confused but moved to join him. My hands shook as I connected the USB to the large TV in Patricia's living room. The familiar desktop appeared, and I opened the folder labeled Bill's Achievements. "As you all know," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "Bill has always been dedicated to his work. But recently I discovered just how creative he's been." I clicked on the first file. An email from Bill to Clara appeared on the screen, full of passionate declarations of love. The room fell silent. "What is this?" Bill demanded, his face pale. I ignored him, clicking through more emails, bank statements, property listings. With each revelation, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Alexis, stop this right now," Bill hissed, reaching for the remote. I jerked away from him. "No, Bill. I'm done stopping. I'm done pretending." I turned to face the stunned family members. For months, Bill and Clara have been carrying on an affair. They've been planning to leave us all behind and start a new life together. Clara let out a choked sob. "Bill, you said you'd handle this." The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew, people took sides. Through it all, I stood firm, Patricia at my side. Bill's face contorted with rage. He lunged for me, but Patricia stepped between us. "Don't you dare touch her," she spat. "You're no son of mine." As security escorted Bill and Clara out, I felt a strange mix of vindication and emptiness. The truth was out, but at what cost? Patricia squeezed my hand. "It's done," she whispered. I nodded, watching as my marriage, my life as I knew it, crumbled around me. But beneath the pain, a spark of something new flickered to life. Freedom. Strength. The chance to rebuild. The storm had broken, but the aftermath was just beginning. The aftermath of the revelation was a whirlwind. Family members crowded around me, some offering comfort, others demanding explanations. Through it all, I stood firm, my eyes fixed on the door where Bill and Clara had disappeared. Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone, please. Let's give Alexis some space." As the crowd dispersed, murmuring in shocked clusters, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Uncle George, Bill's father, his face ashen. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it," I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm sorry, George. I wish it wasn't." He shook his head, eyes brimming with tears. "No, Alexis, we're the ones who should be sorry. How could we not have seen?" Before I could respond, the door burst open. Bill stormed back in, his face contorted with rage. Clara trailed behind him, mascara streaking her cheeks. "How dare you?" Bill snarled, advancing on me. "You had no right to air our private business like this." I stood my ground, feeling Patricia and George flanking me. "No right? You lost any right to privacy when you decided to betray our family. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling. Alexis, please. We never meant to hurt you. We fell in love. You have to understand. Understand? I laughed bitterly. Understand that my husband and his cousin have been sneaking around behind my back, planning to abandon their families? Please, enlighten me. Bill's eyes darted around the room, taking in the hostile faces of our relatives. This isn't how this was supposed to go, he muttered. No, I agreed. I'm sure you had a much neater exit planned. Tell me, Bill, when were you going to serve me with those divorce papers I found? Before or after you emptied our joint accounts? A collective gasp went through the room. Bill paled, realizing just how much I knew. You went through my personal files? He sputtered. And you went through our vows like they meant nothing. I shot back. Clara stepped between us, her eyes pleading. Please, everyone, we can work this out civilly. There's no need for all this drama. Something inside me snapped. Drama? You want to talk about drama, Clara? How about the drama of explaining to my children why their father abandoned them? Or the drama of facing our friends, our colleagues, knowing everyone will be whispering about how I wasn't enough to keep my husband from straying? I advanced on her, my voice rising. You two didn't just have an affair. You systematically destroyed two families. You lied. You schemed. You betrayed everyone who ever loved you. And for what? A fantasy of running away together? Bill grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. That's enough, Alexis. You've had your revenge. Now let's discuss this like adults. I wrenched away from him, my eyes blazing. Don't you dare touch me. We're far past discussion, Bill. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. Patricia stepped forward, her voice ice cold. Bill, Clara, I think it's time you left. You're no longer welcome in this family. Mom, Bill started, but Patricia held up a hand. No, I've made my decision. Go. As they turned to leave, defeated and humiliated, I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation ebbed away, leaving me hollow. Patricia wrapped an arm around me, steadying me. It's over, Alexis. You did it. I nodded, watching as Bill and Clara walked out of our lives. But even as relief flooded through me, a new fear took hold. What now? How did I begin to rebuild my life from the ashes of this betrayal? As the door closed behind them, I realized the hardest part of my journey was just beginning. 6 months after the fateful family reunion, I stood in the courthouse, my heart pounding as the judge delivered his verdict. In the matter of Alexis Thompson versus William Thompson, this court grants full custody of the minor children to Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson will have supervised visitation rights to be reviewed in 1 year. I exhaled slowly, feeling Patricia's reassuring hand on my shoulder. We'd done it. The divorce was final and my children were safe. As we left the courtroom, I saw Bill standing alone, looking lost. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected to feel anger, hatred even. Instead, I felt nothing. He was a stranger to me now. Clara left him, Patricia murmured as we walked past. Seems their grand love affair couldn't withstand the scrutiny. I nodded, unsurprised. How are you holding up? I asked her. Patricia's eyes misted over. It's not easy, disowning your own child, but he made his choice. Now we make ours. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. I sold our family home, unable to bear the memories it held. With Patricia's help, I found a cozy house closer to the kids' school. It was smaller, but it was ours. A fresh start. One evening, as I unpacked boxes in our new living room, my daughter Emma approached me, her face serious. Mom, are you happy now? She asked. I paused, considering her question carefully. I'm getting there, sweetheart. It's been hard, but we're going to be okay. She nodded, then hugged me fiercely. I'm glad you told the truth about Dad and Aunt Clara, even if it hurt. Tears pricked my eyes as I held her close. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it's always better than living a lie. As Emma went to bed, I found myself on the porch, staring at the stars. Patricia joined me, handing me a glass of wine. Penny for your thoughts? She asked. I sighed. I was just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, I thought I had the perfect life. Now you have a real life, Patricia finished. With all its mess and complications, but it's yours, Alexis. You fought for it. I turned to her, feeling a rush of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, Patricia. You've been more than a mother-in-law. You're family. She squeezed my hand. And don't you forget it. We're in this together now. As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of betrayal, the thrill of revenge, the fear of an uncertain future. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my lawyer. Bill and Clara both served with restraining orders. It's done. I showed Patricia the message, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It really is over, I breathed. She nodded, raising her glass. To new beginnings. I clinked my glass against hers. To family, the ones we choose. As the night deepened around us, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. I had my children, I had Patricia, and most importantly, I had myself. The perfect life I thought I had was gone, shattered by betrayal and lies. But in its place, I'd built something stronger, something real, a life of my own making, full of love, truth, and resilience. As I headed inside, I paused at the door, taking one last look at the star-filled sky. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. The end of one chapter, but the beginning of so much more. My story, my terms, my brighter horizon. I never expected my life to change so dramatically on a sunny Sunday afternoon. The annual family barbecue at my parents' sprawling backyard was in full swing, the air filled with the aroma of grilled burgers and the chatter of relatives catching up. "Megan, sweetheart, can you come here for a moment?" Mom called from the patio, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. I made my way through the crowd, balancing a plate of potato salad in one hand and my daughter's juice box in the other. "What's up, Mom?" Dad stood next to her, his usual jovial expression replaced by an uncharacteristically serious one. "We need to talk to you about something important," he said, gesturing towards the empty chairs. As I sat down, I caught sight of Peter across the yard. My best friend since college, he gave me a curious look, sensing the tension even from a distance. "Honey," Mom began, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in her lap, "your father and I have been thinking about the future of the business." I nodded, unsure where this was going. The family hardware store had been a fixture in our small town for 3 generations. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided it's time to start planning for retirement, and we want you to take over the business." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "What? Me?" I sputtered, nearly dropping my plate. "But I don't know anything about running a hardware store." "You're smart, Megan," Dad said firmly. "You've got a good head for numbers, and you know how to talk to people. We'll teach you everything else." I shook my head, feeling overwhelmed. "But what about Uncle Jim? Or Cousin Mark? They've both worked at the store for years." Mom reached out and squeezed my hand. "We've thought long and hard about this, sweetie. You're the right choice. We trust you to carry on the family legacy." As if on cue, Peter appeared at my side, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes darting between me and my parents. "Peter," Dad exclaimed, his face brightening. "Perfect timing. We were just telling Megan about our decision to make her the successor to the family business." Peter's eyebrows shot up. "Wow, that's big news," he said, giving me a supportive smile. "Congratulations, Meg." I forced a weak smile in return, my mind racing. How could I possibly run a business and be a single mom? What about my job at the library? And what would the rest of the family say? As if reading my thoughts, Mom leaned in. "We know it's a lot to take in, honey, but we believe in you, and we'll be here to help every step of the way." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Can I have some time to think about it?" Dad nodded. "Of course, but don't take too long. We'd like to start the transition soon." As they stood to rejoin the party, leaving me reeling from the news, I felt Peter's hand on my shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "want to take a walk?" Grateful for the escape, I nodded and followed him towards the old oak tree at the edge of the property. "So," Peter said as we walked, "future business mogul, huh?" I let out a shaky laugh. "God, Peter, what am I going to do? I can't run a business. I'm barely keeping it together as it is." He stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Megan, listen to me. You're one of the most capable people I know. If anyone can do this, it's you." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "But what about Emily? How can I be a good mom and run a business?" Peter's voice was gentle but firm. "The same way you've been an amazing mom while working at the library. You'll figure it out. and you won't be alone. I'll be here to help, whatever you need. As I looked into his eyes, I felt a flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with my newfound responsibilities. Before I could respond, a commotion from the patio caught our attention. "Oh no," I groaned, recognizing the raised voices. "Sounds like Uncle Jim just found out." Peter squeezed my hand. "Ready to face the music?" Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "As I'll ever be." Together, we headed back towards the house, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The hardware store loomed before me, its faded sign a stark reminder of the responsibility now resting on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline as I pushed open the door. "Morning, Megan." Uncle Jim called from behind the counter, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The tension from the family barbecue still lingered, thick as the dust on the shelves. "Morning, Uncle Jim," I replied, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Ready to show me the ropes?" he grunted, gesturing vaguely towards the back office. "Your father's waiting for you. Good luck." As I made my way through the aisles, doubt gnawed at my insides. What did I know about inventory management or profit margins? I was a librarian, for heaven's sake. Dad looked up as I entered, his face lighting up. "There's my girl. Ready to learn the family business?" I nodded weakly, sinking into the chair across from him. For the next few hours, he walked me through spreadsheets, supplier contracts, and employee schedules. My head spun with information overload. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Dad said, noticing my overwhelmed expression. "You'll get the hang of it in no time." Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Peter. "How's it going, future CEO? Lunch later?" I smiled, feeling a flutter of warmth. Peter's unwavering support had been my anchor these past few weeks. As I typed a quick reply, Dad cleared his throat. "So you and Peter seem to be getting pretty close," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I felt my cheeks heat up. "We're just friends, Dad." He raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. Well, just remember mixing business and pleasure can be tricky, especially with his family's hotel empire." I frowned, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Dad leaned back in his chair. "I'm just saying, the Caldwells are big fish in a small pond. Peter's father has some aggressive business practices. I'd hate to see you get caught in the crossfire." Before I could respond, the office door burst open. Uncle Jim stood there, his face flushed. "We've got a problem. The Caldwell Hotel just placed a massive order with our biggest competitor. We're going to lose half our commercial accounts." My stomach dropped. I looked at Dad, expecting him to take charge, but he just nodded at me. "What do you think we should do, Megan?" Panic rose in my throat. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of, being thrust into a situation I wasn't prepared for. But as I looked at the expectant faces of my father and uncle, I knew I had to step up. "Okay," taking a deep breath. "Let's call our supplier and see if we can negotiate better prices. Then we'll reach out to our commercial clients and offer them a loyalty discount." Uncle Jim nodded grudgingly. "Not bad, kid. I'll make the calls." As he left, Dad squeezed my shoulder. "See? You've got good instincts. You'll do just fine." I managed a weak smile, but inside my mind was racing. How could Peter's family do this to us? And what did it mean for my relationship with Peter? Later, as I sat across from Peter at our favorite diner, I couldn't shake the unease. He chatted animatedly about his day, but I barely heard him, lost in my own thoughts. "Meg?" "Earth to Megan," Peter said, waving a hand in front of my face. "You okay?" I blinked, focusing on his concerned expression. "Sorry, just a lot on my mind." "Peter, did you know about your father's deal with our competitor?" His face fell, guilt flashing in his eyes. I heard something about it. But Meg, you have to understand it's just business. My father—" "Just business?" I interrupted, anger flaring. "Peter, this could ruin my family's livelihood." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Megan, please, I'm caught in the middle here. My father's been pushing me to take on more responsibility at the hotel, but I don't want it to come between us." I stared at him, torn between my feelings for Peter and my loyalty to my family. "I don't know if it's that simple anymore," I said softly. As I looked into Peter's pleading eyes, I realized that taking over the family business wasn't just about learning spreadsheets and inventory. It was about navigating a complex web of relationships and loyalties. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that challenge. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my dress for the 100th time. The thought of meeting Peter's parents made my stomach churn. After the fallout from the Caldwell Hotel's business move, I wasn't sure what to expect. "Mommy, you look pretty," Emily chirped from the doorway, her gap-toothed smile melting away some of my anxiety. I scooped her up, breathing in her comforting scent. "Thanks, sweetie. Now you be good for Grandma tonight, okay?" The doorbell rang, and my heart leaped into my throat. Peter stood there, looking dashing in a suit, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "Meg, you look beautiful," he said, his eyes warm. "Ready to meet the parents?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The drive to the Caldwell mansion was tense, filled with Peter's nervous chatter about his family's quirks. As we pulled up to the sprawling estate, my jaw dropped. "Peter, this is intimidating," he squeezed my hand. "They're just people, Meg. I promise they don't bite." The front door swung open before we could knock, revealing a petite woman with Peter's kind eyes. "You must be Megan," she exclaimed, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "I'm Caroline. Come in, come in." Peter's father, Robert, was waiting in the living room. He stood as we entered, his imposing figure softened by a genuine smile. "Welcome, Megan. We've heard so much about you." As we settled in for drinks, I braced myself for interrogation or thinly veiled contempt. Instead, I found myself drawn into a warm conversation about my daughter, my work at the library, and my newfound role at the family hardware store. "It's not easy taking over a family business," Robert said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I remember when I first started at the hotel, scared out of my wits." I blinked, caught off guard by his candor. "Really? But you've been so successful," he chuckled. "Success doesn't come overnight, my dear. It takes hard work, determination, and a bit of luck." As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing. Caroline regaled us with embarrassing stories from Peter's childhood, while Robert offered thoughtful advice on business management. During a lull in the conversation, I gathered my courage. "Mr. Caldwell, I have to ask about the deal with our competitor." Robert's expression turned serious. "Ah, yes, I owe you an apology, Megan. I didn't realize the impact it would have on your family's business. I've already spoken to my team about finding a way to make it right." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, that means a lot." As Peter and his father discussed some hotel business, Caroline drew me aside. "Megan, dear, I hope you know how happy we are that Peter's found you. You bring out the best in him." Warmth bloomed in my chest. "He does the same for me," I admitted softly. The evening ended on a high note, with promises of future family dinners and even offers of business advice. As Peter drove me home, I felt a mix of relief and confusion. "See? I told you they'd love you," Peter said, grinning. I nodded, lost in thought. "They're not what I expected. Your dad seems so different from how my father described him." Peter's smile faltered slightly. "Yeah, about that. Meg, there's something I need to tell you." We pulled up to my house, but I made no move to get out. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "My father, he's planning to retire soon, and he wants me to take over the hotel." My heart sank. "Oh, I see." "But that's not all," Peter continued, his voice urgent. "He wants to expand. He's talking about buying up smaller businesses in town, including—" "The hardware store," I finished, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Peter nodded miserably. "I tried to talk him out of it, but he's set on the idea. He thinks it's a smart business move." I stared at him, my mind reeling. The warm, humble couple I'd just met suddenly seemed like a facade. "And what do you think, Peter?" He hesitated, and in that moment, I saw our future hanging in the balance. His answer would determine everything: our relationship, my family's livelihood, the very fabric of our small town. "I think," he said slowly, "that we need to find a way to make this work for everyone. But Meg, I need you to trust me." As I looked into his pleading eyes, I realized that the real challenge was just beginning. Could I trust Peter to stand by me, or would his family's ambitions tear us apart? The days following Peter's revelation were a blur of sleepless nights and anxiety-filled mornings. I threw myself into work at the hardware store, desperately trying to find a way to make it thrive in the face of the Caldwell's expansion plans. One particularly exhausting afternoon, as I pored over inventory sheets, my phone buzzed. It was Caroline Caldwell. "Megan, dear," her warm voice came through the speaker. "Robert and I would love for you to join us for dinner tonight. There's something important we'd like to discuss." My stomach clenched. Of course I'd be happy to. I heard myself say, even as my mind raced with possibilities. As I pulled up to the Caldwell mansion that evening, Peter was waiting outside. His face was a mix of excitement and nervousness that did nothing to calm my frayed nerves. "Meg," he said, taking my hands. "Whatever happens in there, just know that I'm on your side, okay?" I nodded, not entirely sure I believed him. Inside, Robert and Caroline greeted us with warm smiles that seemed at odds with the tension I felt. We settled into the opulent dining room, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, as dessert was served, Robert cleared his throat. "Megan, we've been impressed with how you've handled taking over your family's business. It's not an easy task." "Thank you," I said cautiously, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "Which is why we have a proposition for you. We'd like to offer you a position as co-manager of our new hotel expansion." I blinked. Sure, I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Robert nodded, looking pleased. "Instead of buying out smaller businesses, we've decided to focus on partnering with them. Your hardware store would be a key supplier for our new properties, and you'd have a seat at the table in managing the overall operation." My mind whirled. This was so far from what I'd expected that I didn't know how to respond. Peter squeezed my hand under the table. "It's a chance for us to work together, Meg, to build something amazing." I looked at the eager faces around me, feeling a mix of hope and trepidation. "This is a lot to take in. What about my parents' store? I can't just abandon it." "Of course not," Caroline said quickly. "The store would remain yours, but with our backing and resources, you could expand it beyond your wildest dreams." As they laid out more details of their plan, I found myself getting caught up in the excitement. The possibilities seemed endless. New jobs for the town, a chance to modernize the store, a future with Peter that didn't involve choosing between him and my family. But as the evening wore on, a nagging doubt began to creep in. Was this too good to be true? What were the Caldwells really after? As Peter walked me to my car later that night, I couldn't shake my unease. "It all sounds wonderful," I said slowly, "but I can't help feeling like there's something I'm missing." Peter's face fell slightly. "Meg, I promise you, there's no hidden agenda here. My parents see your potential just like I do. They want to help, not take over." I wanted to believe him, but years of struggling as a single mom had taught me to be cautious. "I need some time to think about it," I said finally. "And to talk to my parents. This affects them too." Peter nodded, looking disappointed but understanding. As he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with fear. This decision could change everything. My future, my family's legacy, my relationship with Peter. Driving home, my mind raced with possibilities and pitfalls. The Caldwells' offer was tempting, but was it worth the risk? Could I trust them and Peter with everything I held dear? As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my parents' car parked outside. They were waiting up, eager to hear about the dinner. In that moment, I realized the weight of the decision before me. It wasn't just about business or love. It was about loyalty, family, and the kind of person I wanted to be. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car ready to face whatever came next. One thing was certain. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same. The weeks following the Caldwells' proposal flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and late-night planning sessions. I found myself swept up in the excitement of it all, my initial doubts fading as I saw the potential for growth and success. Peter and I grew closer than ever, our shared vision for the future, bringing us together in ways I never imagined. One night, as we pored over blueprints for the new hotel expansion, he surprised me with a small velvet box. "Meg," he said, his eyes shining, "I can't imagine doing any of this without you. Will you marry me?" My heart soared as I said yes, the diamond sparkling on my finger, a symbol of all the promises we'd made. But even as we dove into wedding plans, the reality of our new business venture began to set in. The hardware store was busier than ever, supplying materials for the hotel renovations, and I found myself stretched thin trying to manage it all. One particularly hectic morning, as I juggled phone calls and inventory orders, my father walked in, his face grave. "Megan, we need to talk," he said, gesturing to the back office. My stomach dropped. "What's wrong, Dad?" He sighed heavily as we sat down. "I've been looking over the numbers for the store, and something doesn't add up. We're moving more inventory than ever, but our profits are down, way down. I frowned, pulling up the spreadsheets on my computer. As we pored over the figures, a sickening realization dawned on me. The discounts we'd been offering the Caldwell project were far too steep. We were barely breaking even on most orders. How could I have missed this? I whispered, horror washing over me. Dad squeezed my shoulder. You've had a lot on your plate, sweetheart, but we need to fix this and fast, or we'll be out of business within months. Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Peter. Emergency at the hotel site. Need you here ASAP. I looked at my father, torn between my responsibilities to the store and my commitment to the new venture. Go, he said softly. But Megan, be careful. Make sure you're not losing yourself in all of this. At the construction site, I found Peter in heated discussion with his father and a group of contractors. The tension in the air was palpable. Ah, Megan, there you are, Robert Caldwell boomed. We need your expertise. These gentlemen seem to think we need to cut corners on some of the materials to stay on budget. I told them we have a deal with your store for top-quality supplies at the best prices. I felt the blood drain from my face. How could I tell them that those best prices were driving my family's business into the ground? Peter caught my eye, his brow furrowed in concern. Meg, what do you think? In that moment, standing amidst the half-built walls of our future, I felt the weight of my decisions crushing down on me. The store that had been my family's legacy for generations was on the brink of failure because of my poor management. The grand plans I'd made with Peter and his family suddenly seemed like a house of cards, ready to topple at the slightest breeze. I need some time to look over the numbers, I managed to say, my voice shaking slightly. Can we reconvene tomorrow? Robert frowned, clearly displeased, but Peter quickly stepped in. Of course, we all want to make the best decision here. Let's take a day to review everything. As the group dispersed, Peter pulled me aside. What's going on, Meg? You look like you've seen a ghost. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Peter, we need to talk about the store, about this project, about us. His face fell, sensing the gravity of my words. Okay, he said quietly. Let's go somewhere private. As we walked away from the bustling construction site, I knew I was at a crossroads. The choices I made in the next few hours would determine not just the fate of my family's business, but the course of my entire future. Could I find a way to save the store without jeopardizing my relationship with Peter and his family? Or was I about to lose everything I'd worked so hard to build? With each step, the weight of my engagement ring seemed to grow heavier, a reminder of all that was at stake. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake at 3 a.m. Peter's name flashed on the screen, sending a chill down my spine. Meg, it's Dad, Peter's voice cracked. He's had a heart attack. We're at the hospital. The next few hours passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. By dawn, Robert Caldwell was stable but unconscious. The doctors spoke of a long recovery, and as I watched Caroline collapse into tears, I knew everything was about to change. Peter pulled me aside, his face haggard. Meg, I need to step in at the hotel. Dad's been running everything, and with the new expansion. I nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility suddenly thrust upon him. Of course, what can I do to help? Little did I know those words would come back to haunt me. Over the next few weeks, I watched Peter transform. The caring, supportive man I'd fallen in love with vanished, replaced by a stressed, short-tempered stranger. He threw himself into work, often staying at the hotel until the early hours of the morning. One evening, exhausted from juggling the hardware store and helping with the hotel, I arrived at Peter's office with dinner, hoping for a quiet moment together. Instead, I found him shouting at a group of employees, "I don't care if it's not in the budget. Make it happen, or find another job." The workers scurried out, leaving Peter and me alone. He turned, his eyes blazing. "What are you doing here?" I held up the takeout bag, suddenly feeling foolish. "I thought we could have dinner together. Maybe talk about the wedding plans." Peter scoffed. "Wedding plans? Meg, we're in the middle of a crisis here. The expansion is behind schedule, over budget, and you're worried about flower arrangements?" His words stung like a slap. "Peter, I'm trying to help, but I'm also trying to save my family's business. The discounts we're giving you..." Oh, here we go again, he interrupted, rolling his eyes. Meg, it's business. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. The greater good? I echoed, incredulous. Peter, we're talking about my family's livelihood. He slammed his hand on the desk, making me jump. And we're talking about my family's legacy. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? My father built this empire, and now it's all on me. I took a step back, suddenly seeing Peter in a new light. What happened to "we're in this together"? I asked quietly. His face softened for a moment, a flicker of the old Peter shining through. Meg, I'm sorry, I'm drowning here. I reached out to him, but he turned away, his attention caught by a ringing phone. I have to take this. We'll talk later, okay? But later never seemed to come. Days turned into weeks, and Peter grew more distant, more demanding. The hotel staff walked on eggshells around him, and I found myself constantly running interference, trying to smooth over his harsh words and unreasonable demands. One afternoon, as I was reviewing invoices in the hotel office, I overheard Peter in a heated conversation with his mother. We can't keep operating like this, Peter. Caroline's voice was strained. Your father would never... Well, Dad's not here, is he? Peter snapped. And if we don't turn this around, there won't be a hotel for him to come back to. And what about Megan? Caroline asked softly. Have you thought about what this is doing to her, to your relationship? There was a long pause before Peter replied, his voice cold. Megan will understand. This is business, Mom. Nothing personal. I felt my world crumble around me. The man I loved, the future I dreamed of. It was all slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. As I stood there, frozen in shock, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. Emergency at the store. Need you here now. In that moment, torn between the crumbling remains of my personal life and the family business I'd sworn to protect, I realized I was facing the biggest crisis of my life. Everything I cared about was at stake, and I had no idea how to save it all. With trembling hands, I gathered my things and slipped out of the hotel, Peter's harsh words still ringing in my ears. As I drove towards an uncertain future, I wondered if there was anything left of my dreams to salvage, or if it was time to cut my losses and start anew. The hardware store was in chaos when I arrived. Dad stood amidst a sea of paperwork, his face ashen. Megan, we're in trouble. Big trouble. As we pored over the books, the full extent of our crisis became clear. The steep discounts we'd given the Caldwell Hotel had pushed us to the brink of bankruptcy. We had less than a month before we'd have to close our doors for good. I'm so sorry, Dad, I whispered, guilt crushing me. This is all my fault. He squeezed my hand. We'll figure it out, sweetheart. We always do. But as I drove back to the hotel, determination replaced my despair. I'd fix this mess, with or without Peter's help. The hotel lobby was a flurry of activity when I arrived. Sarah, the head of housekeeping, rushed up to me, her eyes wild. Thank goodness you're here, Megan. Half the staff just quit, and we have a full house tonight. I took a deep breath, pushing my own problems aside. Okay, let's get to work. For the next 12 hours, I was everywhere at once, checking in guests, making beds, soothing frayed nerves. By midnight, we'd managed to avert disaster, but I was exhausted. As I slumped against the front desk, Caroline appeared, concern etched on her face. Megan, dear, you look terrible. Where's Peter? I laughed bitterly. Your guess is as good as mine. He hasn't answered his phone all day. Caroline's expression hardened. This isn't like him. Something's wrong. Just then, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Hello? Is this Megan? A woman's voice asked. I'm calling from the Oasis Hotel. There's a gentleman here who's had too much to drink. He says he's your fiancé. My heart sank. I'll be right there. I found Peter slumped at the bar of our biggest competitor, barely conscious. As I half carried him to my car, he mumbled, I'm sorry, Meg. I've ruined everything. Back at our hotel, I helped him to bed, my mind racing. How had we come to this? The next morning, I was back at the front desk when Peter stumbled down, looking worse for wear. Meg, we need to talk. But before he could continue, a group of angry investors burst in, led by Robert Caldwell himself, looking frail but furious. Where's my son? Robert demanded. What's he done to my hotel? As accusations flew and tempers flared, I found myself stepping between Peter and the angry mob. Everyone, please, let's discuss this calmly. For the next hour, I mediated a tense meeting. piecing together the extent of Peter's mismanagement. He'd made risky investments, alienated key partners, and nearly run the hotel into the ground. When the dust settled, Robert turned to me, his eyes shrewd. "Megan, you've shown remarkable leadership today. How would you like to take over as interim manager?" I blinked, stunned. "But what about Peter?" Robert's face hardened. "My son needs time to get his act together. The hotel needs someone competent at the helm." As the weight of the offer sank in, I realized this was my chance to save not just the hotel, but my family store as well. But could I do it? And at what cost to my relationship with Peter? I looked at Peter, hoping to see some sign of the man I'd fallen in love with, but his eyes were cold, resentful. "Go ahead, Meg, take it. You've always wanted to be in charge anyway." His words stung, but they also ignited a fire within me. "You know what? I will." Turning to Robert, I squared my shoulders. "I accept, on one condition. We renegotiate our contract with my family's hardware store. Fair prices that benefit both businesses." Robert nodded, impressed. "Done." As the room cleared out, I found myself alone with Peter. The air between us crackled with unspoken words and broken promises. "So this is it?" Peter said, his voice bitter. "You're taking everything from me?" I felt my heart breaking, but I stood my ground. "No, Peter, you did this to yourself." As he stormed out, I sank into a chair, the enormity of what lay ahead crashing down on me. I'd saved the hotel and my family's store, but at what cost? Could I really do this alone? Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Dad. "Proud of you, kiddo. You've got this." Taking a deep breath, I stood up. It was time to get to work. The real test was just beginning. 6 months had passed since I took over as interim manager of the Caldwell Hotel. Every day had been a battle, but slowly, surely, we were turning things around. The staff rallied behind me, the guests were happy, and even Robert Caldwell had started to smile again. I hadn't heard from Peter in weeks. Part of me was relieved, while another part ached for closure. But I had no time for regrets. I had a hotel to run and a family business to save. It was a busy Friday afternoon when I saw him walk through the lobby doors. My heart stuttered. Peter looked good. Too good. Tanned, well-dressed, with a sparkle in his eye I hadn't seen in months, and on his arm was a young woman, her laughter tinkling across the marble floor. "Megan," Peter called out, his voice jovial, "just the person I wanted to see." I steeled myself, plastering on a professional smile. "Peter, welcome back. How can I help you?" He grinned, pulling the woman closer. "Megan, I'd like you to meet Sophia, my fiancée." The world tilted on its axis. "Fiancée?" I repeated, my voice sounding far away. Peter nodded, oblivious to my shock. "We met on my trip to the Bahamas. It was love at first sight. Anyway, we're here to plan our wedding. I want to host it here, at the hotel, for old time's sake." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "I see. And what does your father think about this?" Peter waved dismissively. "Oh, Dad will come around. Once he sees how happy I am, how successful I've become with my new business ventures, he'll understand why I needed to step away from the hotel." I nodded, had my mind racing. "Of course. Well, congratulations. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on something in the office. Sarah here will help you with your reservation." As I turned to leave, Peter caught my arm. "Oh, and Meg, I'll need those divorce papers signed ASAP for the wedding, you know." I pulled away, my voice ice cold. "I'll have my lawyer contact you." In my office, I allowed myself a moment to break down. Tears of anger, hurt, and frustration flowed freely. But as I looked at the framed photo on my desk, my daughter, my parents, and me at the grand reopening of our hardware store, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. Taking a deep breath, I made a call. "Robert, it's Megan. We need to talk." An hour later, I walked back into the lobby, my head held high. Peter and Sophia were at the bar, champagne flutes in hand. "Peter," I called out, my voice steady. "A word, please?" He sauntered over, cocky grin in place. "What's up, Meg? Everything set for the wedding?" I smiled, sweet as poison. "Not quite. You see, there's been a change in management you should know about." Peter's grin faltered. "What do you mean?" "Well, your father and the board were so impressed with my work these past months, they've offered me the position of permanent general manager, with a significant ownership stake." The color drained from Peter's face. But that's my position, my birthright." I shook my head. "Not anymore." "Oh, and about that wedding? I'm afraid we're fully booked for the next year. You understand, don't you? It's just business after all." Nothing personal. As Peter sputtered and raged, I saw Sophia slip away, her eyes wide with realization. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You can't do this, Peter hissed. I'll fight you. You'll what? I interrupted. Sue your own family's hotel? Go ahead. I'm sure the press will love that story. As security escorted a fuming Peter out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd faced my greatest challenge and come out stronger. The hotel was thriving, my family's store was saved, and I had finally found my own path. Later that evening, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked, "Mommy, are you happy?" I smiled, realizing the truth in my answer. "Yes, sweetheart, I really am." As I closed her bedroom door, my phone buzzed with a message from Caroline. "Dinner tomorrow? We have some exciting expansion plans to discuss." I grinned, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm had passed, and I had not only weathered it, but emerged victorious. The future was bright, and this time, I was in control. Standing at the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city, I raised a silent toast to myself. To new beginnings, hard-won victories, and the sweet taste of well-deserved success. The best revenge, after all, is living well, and I intended to do just that. I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, scrutinizing my reflection in the full-length mirror. The ivory silk clung to my curves, a perfect fit for tomorrow's wedding. My wedding. A soft knock at the door startled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called, expecting my maid of honor with a last-minute checklist. The door creaked open, and my heart sank. It wasn't best friend, but my younger half-sister, Lydia. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect makeup smudged. "Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I steeled myself, plastering on a smile. "Lydia, what a surprise. I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow." She stepped into the room, wringing her hands. "I couldn't wait. There's something you need to know." A chill ran down my spine. "What is it?" Lydia took a deep breath. "It's about Trevor." My fiancé's name on her lips sent warning bells ringing in my head. "What about Trevor?" "We've been seeing each other," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "For over a year now." The room spun. I gripped the edge of my vanity to steady myself. "You're lying," I spat. "This is my wedding we're talking about." Lydia's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "I wish I was lying, Grace, but it's true. Ask him yourself." I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed Trevor's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, beautiful. Getting cold feet?" His voice was light, teasing. "Trevor," I said, my voice tight. "Is it true? Have you been seeing Lydia?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Grace, I can explain. It's not what you think." I ended the call, my vision blurring with unshed tears. Lydia stood there watching me, her expression a mix of guilt and something else. "Triumph? Why?" I choked out. "Why would you do this to me?" Lydia's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Grace. I never meant for it to happen. It just did." I laughed bitterly. "Things don't just happen, Lydia. You made a choice. Both of you did." She reached out to touch my arm, but I jerked away. "Don't," I warned. "Don't you dare try to comfort me." A knock at the door interrupted us. My mother's voice drifted through the wood. "Grace? Lydia? Is everything all right in there?" I wiped my eyes hastily, clearing my throat. "Everything's fine, Mom. We'll be out in a minute." Lydia's eyes widened. "You're not going to tell her?" I fixed her with a steely gaze. "Oh, I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell everyone, but first I need to deal with Trevor." I strode to the door, yanking it open. My mother stood there, concern etched on her face. "Grace, what's wrong?" I brushed past her, my mind set on one goal. "The wedding's off," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I need to see Trevor." As I marched down the hallway, I heard Lydia's frantic whispers to our mother, followed by a gasp of shock. But I didn't look back. My world was crumbling around me, but I'd be damned if I'd let them see me fall apart. I burst into Trevor's study without knocking. He looked up from his desk, surprise quickly replaced by guilt on his handsome face. "Grace," he started, rising to his feet. "Let me explain." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Trevor. I don't want to hear your excuses." He moved around the desk, reaching for me. "It was just a fling, Grace. It doesn't mean anything." I stepped back, my anger rising. "A fling? With my sister? For over a year?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You've turned our entire relationship into a lie." Trevor's face hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Grace. These things happen. We can work through this. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger, tossing it onto his desk. No, Trevor. We can't. It's over. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. Think about what you're doing, Grace. Think about the scandal, the gossip. Is that what you want? I wrenched my arm free, fixing him with a glare that could freeze hell itself. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to go to hell. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. The weight of what had just happened crashed over me like a tidal wave. My wedding was off. My fiancé had betrayed me. My sister had betrayed me. And tomorrow I'd have to face a house full of guests, all expecting a joyous celebration. I straightened up, squaring my shoulders. I was Grace Granger, and I'd be damned if I'd let them see me broken. As I walked back to my room, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the night pacing my room, my mind a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. As dawn broke, I knew I couldn't face the arriving guests or deal with canceling the wedding alone. I needed backup. With trembling hands, I dialed Peter's number. My old colleague and friend answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Grace, what's wrong? Peter, I need your help. The wedding's off. Trevor's been cheating on me with Lydia. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Peter arrived just as I finished throwing some clothes into a suitcase. His familiar face, etched with concern, was a welcome sight. What do you need me to do? He asked, no preamble necessary. Help me face the music, I said, squaring my shoulders. We need to tell the guests and cancel everything. As we descended the stairs, my mother's shrill voice echoed from the living room. Grace Elizabeth Granger! You get down here this instant! I exchanged a glance with Peter before stepping into the lion's den. Mom stood in the center of the room, her face a mask of fury. Trevor lounged on the sofa, looking more annoyed than remorseful. Lydia huddled in a corner, eyes red and puffy. What is the meaning of this? Mom demanded. Trevor tells me you're calling off the wedding. Have you lost your mind? I felt Peter's steadying presence behind me as I faced my mother. No, Mom. I've finally come to my senses. The wedding's off because Trevor's been cheating on me with Lydia for over a year. Mom's face paled, her gaze darting between Trevor and Lydia. Is this true? Trevor stood, straightening his jacket. Now, Beverly, let's not blow this out of proportion. It was just a little indiscretion, hardly worth canceling a wedding over. I couldn't believe my ears. A little indiscretion? You've been sleeping with my sister. Half-sister, Lydia mumbled, earning glares from everyone in the room. Mom turned on Lydia, her voice ice-cold. You. How could you do this to your sister? Oh, spare me the righteous indignation, Mom, I snapped. You're more worried about the scandal than my feelings. That's not true, Mom protested, but her eyes betrayed her. Trevor stepped towards me, his charm cranked up to 11. Grace, darling, let's talk about this rationally. Think about all we've invested in this wedding and our future. We can work through this. I felt my resolve wavering for a moment, years of conditioning kicking in. Then I felt Peter's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. No, Trevor, I said firmly. We can't. It's over. Trevor's face darkened. You're making a big mistake, Grace. Think about your career, your reputation. Do you really want to be known as the jilted bride? Better that than the fool who married a cheater, I retorted. Lydia suddenly sprang to life, rushing towards me. Grace, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. You have to believe me. I stepped back, bumping into Peter. Don't touch me, Lydia. You're dead to me. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Mom looked between us, her face a mix of shock and disappointment. What are we going to tell people? She finally asked. I turned to Peter. That's where you come in. Can you help me notify the guests and cancel the arrangements? He nodded, squeezing my shoulder. Of course, whatever you need. As Peter and I turned to leave, Trevor called out, Grace, don't do this. You're throwing away everything we've built. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the wreckage of my life. My cheating fiancé, my traitorous sister, my image-obsessed mother. In that moment, I knew I needed to escape, to find myself again. No, Trevor, I said quietly. I'm finally building something real, a life without lies. With that, I walked out, Peter by my side, leaving behind the shattered remains of my old life. As we stepped into the sunlight, I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. Where to now? Peter asked gently. I thought for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Take me to my childhood home. It's time I faced some old ghosts. The drive to my childhood home was silent, the weight of recent events hanging heavy between Peter and me. As we pulled up to the weathered Victorian house, my stomach churned with a mix of dread and nostalgia. You sure about this, Grace? Peter asked, concern etching his features. I nodded, steeling myself. I need to face this head-on. The front door creaked open before we reached it, revealing my mother, Beverly Quinn, looking as formidable as ever in her tailored suit. Well, well, she drawled, eyeing us critically. The prodigal daughter returns. I bit back a retort, reminding myself why I was here. Hello, Mom. Can we talk? She stepped aside, gesturing us in with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. The house smelled the same, a mix of lemon polish and stale perfume that instantly transported me back to my tumultuous teenage years. We settled in the living room, the tension palpable. Peter excused himself to make coffee, leaving me alone with my mother. So, Beverly began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, I hear congratulations are in order. You've managed to spectacularly implode your wedding and your relationship in one fell swoop. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice steady. I didn't come here for your judgment, Mom. I came because I need. What? She pressed, leaning forward. What could you possibly need from me after all these years? The words stuck in my throat, but I forced them out. Advice. How did you do it? How did you move on after Dad's betrayal? Beverly's eyes widened, genuine surprise replacing her usual mask of disdain. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be, before bitterness and resentment had taken hold. Oh, Grace, she sighed, her shoulders sagging. I didn't. I never moved on. I let it consume me, define me, and look where that got us. Her unexpected honesty caught me off guard. But you seemed so strong, so unaffected. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. That was the greatest lie of all. I was broken, and instead of putting myself back together, I let the broken pieces cut everyone around me, especially you and Lydia. As if summoned by her name, the front door burst open, and Lydia stormed in, her face a storm of emotions. How dare you run away like that? She shouted, ignoring our mother completely. We weren't finished talking. I stood, anger flaring anew. There's nothing left to say, Lydia. You made your choice. Girls, please, Beverly interjected, but we both ignored her. Lydia advanced, her voice rising. You always do this. Run away when things get tough. You ran from Dad, you ran from Mom, and now you're running from me and Trevor? I'm not running, I shot back. I'm finally standing my ground. Enough! Beverly's voice cracked like a whip, silencing us both. It looks like history is repeating itself, dear. The same old patterns, the same old pain. I turned to her, fury building. I'm nothing like you, Mom. I won't let this define me. Beverly's eyes softened, surprising me again. Good. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Lydia scoffed, drawing our attention back to her. Oh, please. You're more like her than you know, Grace. Always playing the victim. Always thinking you're better than everyone else. That's rich coming from you, I spat. You've spent your entire life trying to tear me down out of jealousy. Jealousy? Lydia laughed bitterly. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've had to do to survive in this family. Then enlighten me, I challenged, stepping closer. What could possibly justify betraying your own sister? Lydia's face contorted, a mix of pain and rage. You want the truth? Fine. I slept with Trevor because I wanted to hurt you. I wanted you to feel just a fraction of the pain I've felt living in your shadow all these years. Her words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. In that moment, I saw the depth of her resentment, the years of pent-up anger and hurt. Beverly stood, moving between us. It looks like we all have some hard truths to face. The question is, are we brave enough to do it? As I looked from my mother to my sister, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and it would either tear us apart forever or forge a new, stronger bond. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's lay it all out on the table. No more lies, no more secrets. Lydia's eyes narrowed, a challenge in her gaze. Be careful what you wish for, sister dear. You might not like what you hear. The tension in the room was suffocating as Lydia, Mom, and I faced each other, years of unspoken resentment hanging between us. Peter had wisely retreated to the kitchen, leaving us to our family drama. You want the truth? Lydia spat, her eyes blazing. Fine, I'm here because I need money. The inheritance Dad left me is gone, and I'm drowning in debt. I felt a surge of bitter satisfaction. So sleeping with Trevor wasn't just about hurting me. You were after his money too. Lydia's face flushed with anger. Don't you dare judge me. You have no idea what it's like to struggle while watching your perfect sister sail through life. Girls, please, Mom interjected, but we ignored her. Struggle? I laughed incredulously. You've had every advantage, Lydia. What could you possibly be struggling with? Lydia's eyes darted to Mom, then back to me. You really want to know? I've been paying for Mom's medical treatments for the past year. Treatments she's been hiding from you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I turned to Mom, searching her face for confirmation. What treatments? What is she talking about? Mom sank into her chair, suddenly looking every bit her 60 years. I didn't want to worry you, Grace. You were so busy with your career and the wedding. I'm your daughter, I cried, feeling the sting of betrayal anew. How could you keep this from me? Because she knew you'd try to fix everything like always, Lydia sneered. Saint Grace to the rescue. I whirled on her. And you've been paying for her treatments? With what money? Lydia's defiant expression crumbled. I may have borrowed against the house. Dad's house. The implications hit me like a freight train. Our childhood home, the only tangible connection we had left to our father, was at risk because of Lydia's actions. You what? I breathed, struggling to process this new betrayal. I had no choice, Lydia shouted, tears streaming down her face. Mom needed the treatments, and you were too caught up in your perfect life to notice anything was wrong. I felt like I was drowning, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations. Why didn't either of you come to me? I could have helped. Because we didn't want to be another burden on your shoulders, Mom said softly. You've always carried so much, Grace. We thought we could handle this on our own. The irony of their misguided attempt to protect me wasn't lost on me. All these years, I'd been maintaining a facade of perfection, thinking it would somehow shield my family from pain. Instead, it had driven us further apart. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The treatments, the house, what are we going to do? Lydia laughed bitterly. That's why I came clean about Trevor. I thought if I ruined your wedding, you'd be so angry you'd pay me off to leave you alone. I could use that money to save the house. The calculated cruelty of her plan stunned me into silence. This was my sister, my flesh and blood, admitting she'd deliberately set out to destroy my happiness for financial gain. Oh, Lydia, Mom sighed, shaking her head. What have we become? I stood up abruptly, needing space to think. I need some air. As I headed for the door, Lydia called out, her voice tinged with desperation. Grace, wait! I'm sorry. I know it was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. Please, help us. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. The weight of their expectations, their needs pressed down on me. Part of me wanted to run, to leave this mess behind and start fresh somewhere new. But another part, the part that had always felt responsible for holding this family together, wouldn't let me walk away. I turned back, meeting their anxious gazes. I'll help, I said slowly, but on my terms. No more lies, no more secrets. We deal with this together, as a family, or not at all. The relief on their faces was palpable, but I felt no satisfaction. As I stepped outside, drawing in a deep breath of cool air, I knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Saving our childhood home, dealing with Mom's illness, confronting the web of lies we'd all woven, it would take every ounce of strength I had. But as I stood there, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I'd grown up, I made a silent vow. I would find a way through this mess, not just for my family, but for myself. It was time to rewrite our story, to break the cycle of betrayal and resentment that had defined us for too long. With renewed determination, I turned back to the house, ready to face whatever came next. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might weather it together. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose. I'd promised to help my family, but I needed answers first. While Mom and Lydia slept, I slipped into Dad's old study, a room that had remained largely untouched since his death. The musty smell of old books and leather enveloped me as I entered. I ran my fingers along the spines of his law books, remembering how I'd once dreamed of following in his footsteps. Now, I was here to uncover the truth he'd left behind. I started rifling through his desk drawers, searching for any clue that might shed light on our family's tangled history. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old files, I found a small, ornate box. My heart raced as I lifted the lid. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to me in Dad's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and began to read. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've finally started asking the right questions. I've carried the weight of our family's secrets for too long, and it's time you knew the truth. Lydia has always struggled with feeling second best. I fear her resentment will one day pull you and her apart, but the roots of her anger go deeper than you know. The truth is, Lydia isn't your half-sister. She's your full sister, born from an affair your mother had early in our marriage. I chose to raise her as my own, but the strain of this secret tore our family apart. Your mother's guilt, my resentment, and Lydia's constant feeling of not belonging, it all stems from this. I've tried to compensate by favoring you, Grace, but I see now that I've only made things worse. I'm sorry for the burden this knowledge will place on you, but you've always been the strong one, the peacemaker. I hope that with this truth, you can find a way to heal our family's wounds. Forgive us, Grace, and help Lydia find her place in this world. With all my love, Dad. I sat back, stunned. The letter slipped from my fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, had just been turned upside down. Suddenly, Lydia's lifelong resentment made sense. Her desperate attempts to win Mom's approval, her jealousy of my relationship with Dad, it all clicked into place. Grace? Lydia's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. What are you doing in here? I couldn't speak. I simply handed her the letter, watching as the color drained from her face as she read. Is this true? She whispered, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. I nodded, my own vision blurring. It explains so much, doesn't it? Lydia sank to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. All these years, I thought I was the outsider, the unwanted one, but I was just lost. I moved to sit beside her, tentatively putting an arm around her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. We've both been lost, Lydia, I said softly. Maybe it's time we found our way back to each other. She looked at me, a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. How can you even look at me after everything I've done? I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. Because you're my sister, my full sister, and it's time we stopped letting the past define us. Lydia nodded, wiping her eyes. What do we do now? I stood up, offering her my hand. First we talk to Mom, then we figure out how to save the house and get you both the help you need. Together. As Lydia took my hand, I felt a shift in the air between us. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with painful conversations and hard truths. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. We walked out of the study side by side, ready to face our mother and the future, whatever it might hold. The web of lies that had entangled our family for so long was finally beginning to unravel. It was up to us now to weave something new from the threads that remained. The tension in the air was palpable as we gathered around the dining table that evening. Mom had insisted on a family dinner, a futile attempt at normalcy amidst the chaos of our lives. Peter had excused himself, sensing the impending storm. I clutched Dad's letter in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the truth I now carried. Lydia sat across from me, her eyes darting nervously between Mom and me. She knew what was coming. Before we eat, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, there's something we need to discuss. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Grace, please, can't we just have one peaceful meal? No, Mom, we can't keep burying the truth. It's time we faced it head on. I pulled out the letter, smoothing it on the table. I found this in Dad's study. It explains everything. As I read the letter aloud, the color drained from Mom's face. Lydia's hands trembled, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Then Mom broke down, years of guilt pouring out in heaving sobs. I'm so sorry, she wept. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was protecting you both. Lydia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Protecting us? You've been lying to us our entire lives. I reached out to her, but she recoiled. Lydia, please, we can work through this together. Her laugh was bitter, tinged with hysteria. Together? All these years and you still couldn't be happy for me. You had everything, Dad's love, Mom's attention, success in your career. What did I have? Scraps. That's not true, I protested, but the words felt hollow even to me. Isn't it? Lydia's eyes blazed with a mixture of pain and fury. You were always the golden child, Grace. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect fiancé. And what was I? The family disappointment. Mom tried to interject, but Lydia silenced her with a glare. Don't. You don't get to play the victim here. You're the one who started all of this with your affair. I stood, trying to defuse the situation. Lydia, I know you're hurt, but... Hurt? She scoffed. I'm way past hurt, Grace. I'm done. Done with this family. Done with your condescension. Done with living in your shadow. She stormed towards the door, but I couldn't let her leave like this. I grabbed her arm, and suddenly, years of pent-up rage exploded. Lydia whirled around, her hand connecting with my cheek in a resounding slap. The shock of it sent me stumbling backward. Mom screamed, rushing to my side, but I barely heard her. All I could focus on was Lydia's face, contorted with a mixture of satisfaction and horror at what she'd done. Lydia, I whispered, my cheek stinging. What have we become? For a moment I saw a flicker of the sister I once knew in her eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by cold determination. I'll tell you what I've become, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I've become someone who's done playing by your rules. You think you can swoop in and fix everything with your perfect Grace Granger touch? Well, you can't fix this. She reached into her purse, pulling out a stack of papers. You see these? This is my plan to take over Dad's company. The company you never cared about, but that I've been working my ass off in for years. And now, it's going to be mine. I stared at her, stunned. What are you talking about? Lydia's smile was cruel. Oh, sister dear, did you really think I was just sitting around feeling sorry for myself all these years? I've been planning, waiting for the right moment. And now, thanks to your little revelation, I have everything I need to discredit you and take what's rightfully mine. Mom gasped, Lydia, you can't be serious. Watch me, Lydia snarled, heading for the door. It's time I made my own light instead of living in Grace's shadow. As the door slammed behind her, I sank to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had thought the truth would heal us, but instead, it had torn us apart in ways I never imagined possible. Mom's hand on my shoulder felt like a lead weight. Grace, what are we going to do? I looked up at her, feeling more lost than I ever had in my life. I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. The morning after Lydia's explosive revelation, I woke to a flurry of missed calls and urgent messages. My head pounded as I scrolled through them, each one more alarming than the last. Lydia had wasted no time in setting her plan in motion. I rushed to the family company's headquarters, my stomach churning with dread. As I stepped into the lobby, all eyes turned to me. Whispers followed in my wake, and I caught snippets of conversation that made my blood run cold. Did you hear? Grace Granger's been embezzling. I always knew there was something off about her. I pushed past them, heading straight for the boardroom. As I burst through the doors, I found Lydia holding court, surrounded by the board members. Her eyes gleamed with triumph as she saw me. Ah, Grace. How kind of you to join us, she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We were just discussing your creative accounting practices. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you talking about? Lydia smiled, sliding a stack of documents across the table. These financial records show some very interesting transfers from the company accounts to your personal ones. Care to explain? I leafed through the papers, my hands shaking. The numbers were all wrong, doctored to make it look like I'd been siphoning funds for years. This is impossible. I've never... Oh, come now, Grace, Lydia interrupted. We all know how hard you've worked. Is it so surprising that you'd want to ensure your own financial security? The board members murmured among themselves, their faces a mix of disappointment and anger. I looked to Mr. Jameson, Dad's old friend and my longtime mentor on the board. His eyes were filled with sadness as he shook his head. Grace, I'm sorry, but given the evidence, we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation. The room spun around me. This couldn't be happening. You can't seriously believe this. Lydia, tell them the truth. Lydia's face hardened. I am telling the truth, Grace. For once in your life, you're not going to be able to talk your way out of this. As security escorted me from the building, I saw Mom waiting in the parking lot, her face etched with worry. Grace, what's happening? Lydia called, said something about you being in trouble. I couldn't bring myself to explain. Instead, I collapsed into her arms, sobbing like I hadn't since I was a child. Mom held me tight, stroking my hair. Oh, my sweet girl, she whispered. What have we done to each other? Back at home, I paced the living room, my mind racing. Peter arrived, his face grim as I filled him in on Lydia's machinations. We need to fight this, Grace, he insisted. There must be a way to prove your innocence. I shook my head, feeling defeated. How? Lydia's had years to plan this. She knows all our weaknesses, all our secrets. She's always been in my shadow, and now she's found a way to make her own light, by extinguishing mine. Mom, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. No, Grace, you can't give up. You're stronger than this, stronger than Lydia, stronger than me. You've always been the one to hold this family together. Her words sparked something in me, a flicker of the fire I'd thought Lydia had extinguished. I stood straighter, my resolve hardening. You're right, Mom. I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, to make everyone happy. But now? Now it's time to fight fire with fire. I turned to Peter, a plan forming in my mind. I need your help. We're going to dig into every corner of this company, every decision Lydia's made. If she wants to play dirty, she's about to learn that two can play at that game. As I spoke, I felt a shift within me. The old Grace, the peacemaker, the perfect daughter, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal and deceit. Lydia thought she'd won, that she'd finally stepped out of my shadow. But she was about to learn a harsh truth. Sometimes it's the shadows you need to fear the most. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying over the keys as I started to put my plan into action. Lydia, you've chosen darkness over and over again. Now it's time you learned what real darkness looks like. As I hit send on the message, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no going back now. The final showdown was about to begin, and only one of us would emerge victorious. The boardroom fell silent as I strode in, my heels echoing on the polished floor. Lydia's smug smile faltered as she saw the determination in my eyes. I'd spent the last week gathering evidence, calling in favors, and preparing for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I began, my voice steady. I'm here to set the record straight. I laid out the truth, piece by damning piece. The doctored financial records Lydia had presented, I'd traced them back to her own computer. The supposed embezzlement, a clever manipulation of numbers that, when unraveled, revealed Lydia's own misappropriation of funds. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Lydia's face. The board members leaned in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. But why? Mr. Jameson asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. Lydia, why would you do this? Lydia's composure cracked. Because I deserved it, she screamed, her eyes wild. I've worked just as hard as Grace, but she always got the praise, the recognition. It was my turn. In that moment, I saw my sister for who she truly was, a wound-desperate woman who'd let her resentment consume her. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort her as I had when we were children, but I knew we were past that now. Lydia, I said softly, you've chosen darkness over and over again, but it didn't have to be this way. We could have built something together, supported each other. She laughed bitterly. Always the perfect sister, aren't you, Grace? Even now, you think you can fix everything. No, I replied, shaking my head. I can't fix this, but I can move forward. I turned to the board. I'm stepping down from my position in the company. It's time for me to start a new chapter. Gasps filled the room. Mr. Jameson stood, protesting. Grace, you can't leave. The company needs you. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The company will be fine. It's time I wrote my own story. As I walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the shocked faces and Lydia's defeated form, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in years. Mom was waiting for me in the lobby, her eyes questioning. It's done, I told her. I've cleared my name, but I'm leaving the company. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Where will you go? I took a deep breath, realizing I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know yet, but for the first time in my life, that uncertainty doesn't terrify me. Mom squeezed my hand. Maybe this time you'll write your own story without the weight of our family's expectations. As we stepped out into the sunlight, I saw Peter waiting by his car. He'd been my rock through this ordeal, and I felt a flutter in my chest as our eyes met. "Ready for a new adventure?" he asked, a smile playing on his lips. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. More than ready. As we drove away from the building that had been the center of my world for so long, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayals, the lies, the pain, they had all shaped me, but they didn't define me. I thought of Lydia, hoping that one day she might find peace. I thought of Trevor, grateful that his betrayal had freed me from a life that wasn't truly mine. And I thought of Dad, wishing he could see the strength I'd found in myself. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time I was excited about the possibilities. I'd spent so long trying to be the perfect daughter, sister, and fiancée that I'd lost sight of who I really was. Now, as the city faded in the rearview mirror, I felt like I was finally coming home to myself. The web of lies that had entangled my family for so long was broken, and in its place I was weaving a new tapestry, one of honesty, self-discovery, and hope. "So," Peter asked, glancing at me, "where to?" I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the promise of a new beginning in my heart. "Anywhere," I replied, "as long as it's forward." As we drove into the unknown, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, of expectations, of resentments, of the past itself. And in that letting go, we find the strength to begin again. The road stretched out before us, full of possibilities. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to embrace them all. I stared at the painting, my fingers trembling as I held the accompanying note. The brushstrokes were hauntingly familiar, but I couldn't place them. The message, however, was crystal clear. "You betrayed me, Jenna. Now it's time to pay." My heart raced as I set the painting down on the kitchen counter. Who could have sent this, and what betrayal were they talking about? I racked my brain, but came up empty. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my thoughts. "Max?" I breathed a sigh of relief as my boyfriend walked in, his suit slightly rumpled from a long day at the office. "Hey, babe," he said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." I gestured to the painting. "This arrived today. No return address, just this cryptic message." Max frowned, picking up the note. His eyes widened as he read it. "Jenna, this is serious. Do you have any idea who might have sent it?" I shook my head, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "No, I don't. I've been racking my brain all afternoon, but I can't think of anyone I've betrayed." Max pulled me into a hug, his cologne enveloping me. "It's okay. We'll figure this out together. Have you called the police?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first. Do you think I should?" He nodded, his face serious. "Absolutely. This could be a threat, Jenna. We need to take it seriously." As Max dialed the police, I found myself staring at the painting again. It was a landscape, a serene meadow with a solitary tree in the center. But something about it felt off, almost sinister. "They're sending an officer over," Max said, hanging up the phone. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Jenna, I've been thinking, maybe this is a sign." I turned to him, confused. "A sign of what?" He took my hands in his eyes intense. "A sign that we should get married. Present a united front against whoever's trying to intimidate you." I blinked, taken aback. "Max, I don't know. This is all happening so fast." I know, he said quickly. "But think about it. We've been together for 3 years. We live together. Marriage is the next logical step, right?" Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. The police officer, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, listened patiently as we explained the situation. "We'll dust for prints," she said, bagging the painting and note. "In the meantime, Miss Carter, I'd advise you to be extra cautious. Keep your doors locked and report any suspicious activity immediately." After she left, Max turned to me again. "So, what do you think about getting married?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Max, I love you, but this is a lot to process right now. Can we talk about it later?" He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have sprung that on you." As we settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The painting, the note, Max's sudden proposal, it all felt like the beginning of something bigger, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Honey, are you okay?" I had the strangest feeling something was wrong. I stared at the message, debating whether to tell her about the painting. Mom had always been my rock, especially after Dad died, but I didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. "Everything's fine, Mom," I typed back. "Just a busy day at work. Love you." As I set my phone down, I caught Max watching me from across the room. "You didn't tell your mom?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I don't want to worry her until we know more." He nodded, but something in his expression made me uneasy. It was almost as if he was relieved. I pushed the thought away, chalking it up to stress. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, the image of the painting haunted my dreams, along with a nagging feeling that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my dress for the 100th time. The engagement ring on my finger felt heavy, a constant reminder of the whirlwind past few days. "You look beautiful," Max said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. I forced a smile. "Thanks. I just want to make a good impression on your parents." He kissed my cheek. "They'll love you. How could they not?" As we drove to his parents' mansion, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. The mysterious painting was still fresh in my mind, and now I was about to meet my future in-laws for the first time. It felt like too much, too fast. "We're here," Max announced, pulling up to an imposing iron gate. It swung open, revealing a driveway that seemed to stretch for miles. I gasped as we approached the house, if you could call it that. It was more like a palace, all gleaming white stone and manicured gardens. "You grew up here?" I asked, suddenly feeling very small. Max shrugged. "It's just a house." But it wasn't just a house. It was a statement, a declaration of wealth and power that made me acutely aware of the vast difference in our backgrounds. Carol and George were waiting for us in the foyer, a grand space with a crystal chandelier and marble floors. Carol air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume overwhelming. "Jenna, darling, welcome," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We've heard so much about you." George shook my hand, his grip firm. "So, you're the girl who's captured our Max's heart." We moved to the dining room, where a feast was laid out on fine china. As we ate, Carol peppered me with questions about my work, my family, my life. "And your father, dear? What does he do?" she asked, taking a sip of wine. I swallowed hard. "My father passed away when I was young." A heavy silence fell over the table. Carol and George exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. "I'm so sorry to hear that," George said, his tone oddly flat. "It must have been difficult, growing up without a father figure." I nodded, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. "It was, but my mom is amazing. She did everything she could for me." Carol raised an eyebrow. "Everything? I'm sure she tried her best, but a child needs both parents. Don't you agree, Max?" I turned to Max, expecting him to defend me, to say something, anything, but he just stared at his plate, silent. "I think Jenna turned out just fine," I said, my voice tight. "My mom made sure I never felt like I was missing out on anything." George chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Of course, dear, but surely you can see why we might be concerned. Max comes from a complete family. We always hoped he'd marry into one as well." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" Carol reached across the table, patting my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. "We just want what's best for our son. I'm sure you understand." I looked at Max again, silently pleading with him to say something, but he remained quiet, avoiding my gaze. "I think I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound echoing in the tense silence. I hurried out to the garden, my heart pounding. The cool night air did little to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. How dare they judge me, judge my family? And Max, why didn't he say anything? I heard footsteps behind me and turned, expecting, hoping to see Max. But it was Carol, her silk dress rustling as she approached. "Jenna," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I hope we didn't upset you. We're just looking out for our son's interests." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand that, but my family, my upbringing, they made me who I am, and Max loves who I am." Carol's smile tightened. "Does he, or does he love the idea of rebelling against his family?" As her words sank in, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What if she was right? What if Max's sudden proposal wasn't about love at all, but about defying his parents? I looked back at the house, where Max was still inside, still silent. And for the first time since he'd slipped that ring on my finger, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. I stood in the garden, Carol's words ringing in my ears. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. I heard footsteps and turned, hoping to see Max. Instead, it was George, his imposing figure silhouetted against the mansion's lights. "Jenna," he said, his voice gruff, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I crossed my arms, steeling myself. "Did we? Or did you just show your true colors?" George chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But you have to understand, we have certain expectations for our son. And I don't meet them because my father's dead?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was past caring. "It's not just that," George said, his tone maddeningly patient. "It's about lineage, about maintaining a certain standard. Surely you can see that?" Before I could respond, Max appeared at the patio door. "Everything okay out here?" I looked at him, silently pleading for support. But he just stood there, his expression unreadable. "We're fine, son," George said, clapping Max on the shoulder. "Just having a little chat with your fiancé." The word fiancé felt wrong now, tainted by the events of the evening. I pushed past them both, heading back into the dining room where Carol was sipping her wine, a smug smile on her face. "Feeling better, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I think it's time Max and I left." Carol's eyebrows shot up. "But we haven't even had dessert. I had the chef prepare a special chocolate soufflé." "I've lost my appetite," I said coldly. Max finally spoke up. "Jenna, don't you think you're overreacting a bit? My parents are just trying to get to know you." I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. "Overreacting? They've insulted my family, my upbringing, and everything I am, and you've said nothing to defend me." "Now, Jenna," George interjected, "we're all family here, or we will be soon. Let's not say things we'll regret." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Family? Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like judgment and condescension." Carol stood, her face flushed. "How dare you speak to us like that in our own home? Max, are you going to let her talk to us this way?" All eyes turned to Max. This was his moment, his chance to stand up for me, to prove that our love was stronger than his parents' prejudices. I held my breath, waiting. Max looked from his parents to me, his face a mask of indecision. I think we all need to calm down. Jenna, maybe we should go home and discuss this later." His words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I saw our future laid out before me, a lifetime of being second best, of Max choosing his parents over me, of never quite measuring up to their standards. "You're right, Max," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We should go home, but not together." I pulled the engagement ring off my finger and set it on the table with a soft clink. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Jenna, don't," Max started, but I cut him off. "No, Max, I won't be part of a family that doesn't accept me for who I am, and I won't marry a man who won't stand up for me." I turned to Carol and George, my head held high. "Thank you for dinner, and for showing me exactly what kind of family I was about to marry into." With that, I walked out, ignoring Max's calls behind me. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. The future I had imagined with Max was crumbling, but in its place I saw a new path opening up, one where I didn't have to compromise who I was for anyone. I hailed a cab at the gate, my hands shaking as I gave the driver my address. As we pulled away from the mansion, I caught a glimpse of Max in the rearview mirror, standing at the top of the driveway, watching me leave. But he made no move to follow, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. The cab ride home was a blur of streetlights and silent tears. I fumbled with my keys at the door, my hands shaking. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of home hit me, and I broke down. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, and let the sobs rack my body. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just days ago, I was happily planning a future with Max. Now I felt like a stranger in my own life. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts and calls from Max. I ignored them all. What could he possibly say to make this right? As dawn broke, I dragged myself to the shower, letting the hot water wash away the remnants of last night. I emerged feeling raw but determined. I had work to do, clients who depended on me. I couldn't let Max and his family derail my life. At the office, I threw myself into my projects with a fervor that surprised even me. My assistant, Lisa, kept shooting me concerned glances. "Jenna, are you okay?" she finally asked around lunchtime. "You seem different." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Lisa, just focused." But as the day wore on, the facade began to crack. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting to see Max's name. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm heading out early," I told Lisa. "Can you reschedule my last appointment?" I drove aimlessly, not ready to face the emptiness of my apartment. Without realizing it, I found myself at the park where Max had proposed just days ago. The memory, once sweet, now felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I sat on a bench, watching families and couples stroll by, their happiness a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. That's when I saw him, Max, walking towards me with a determined look on his face. "Jenna," he said, sitting down beside me. "We need to talk." I stiffened. "I think we said everything we needed to say last night. Or rather, you didn't say anything when it mattered." He winced. "I know. I messed up. But you have to understand, my parents." "Your parents?" I cut him off. "Max, this isn't about them. It's about us. About you not standing up for me, for us." "I'm sorry," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. I was caught off guard. I didn't expect them to react that way. I laughed bitterly. "Really?" "Because it seemed pretty clear to me that they've always felt that way about people like me." "People like you?" Max echoed, frowning. "Yes, Max. People who didn't grow up with silver spoons in their mouths. People who had to work for everything they have." He shook his head. "That's not fair. My parents just want what's best for me. And I'm not what's best for you." The words hung between us, heavy with implication. Max's silence was deafening. In that moment, I saw our relationship for what it truly was, a fantasy built on shaky ground. "I think you should move out," I said quietly. His head snapped up. "What, Jenna? No, we can work this out." I stood, suddenly feeling stronger than I had in days. "No, Max, we can't. Because this isn't just about last night. It's about who we are, fundamentally. And I don't think we're as compatible as we thought." "Is this about the painting?" he asked suddenly. "The one you received before? All this?" I froze. In the chaos of the past few days, I'd almost forgotten about the mysterious painting. "What do you know about it?" Max looked away, his expression guilty. "Nothing. I wondered if it had anything to do with your decision." But I could see it in his eyes. He was hiding something. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Max knew more than he was letting on about the painting and who sent it. "I think you should leave now," I said, my voice cold. "And when I get home, I expect your things to be gone." As I walked away, leaving Max on the bench, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. The future I had imagined was crumbling, but in its place a new determination was forming. I would get to the bottom of this mystery, with or without Max, and I would do it on my own terms. I stood outside my mother's modest house, my hand hovering over the doorbell. The weight of the past few days pressed down on me, making even this simple action feel monumental. Finally, I pressed the button, hearing the familiar chime inside. Mom opened the door, her face lighting up before quickly shifting to concern. "Jenna, honey, what's wrong?" I crumbled into her arms, the tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free. She guided me inside, settling me on the worn couch that had been a source of comfort throughout my childhood. "It's over, Mom," I choked out between sobs. "Max and we're done." She held me close, stroking my hair like she used to when I was little. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. What happened?" Through hiccuping breaths, I recounted the disastrous dinner with Max's parents, his silence in the face of their judgments, and our final confrontation in the park. Mom listened intently, her face a mix of sympathy and barely concealed anger. "And there's something else," I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Remember that painting I told you about? The one with the threatening message?" Mom nodded, her brow furrowing. "Did you find out who sent it?" "No, but I think Max knows something about it. When I mentioned it, he got this guilty look on his face, like he was hiding something." Mom's eyes widened. "Jenna, that's serious. Have you gone to the police?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I feel like I'm losing my mind, Mom. Nothing makes sense anymore." She squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out together, honey. Now, tell me about this painting. What did it look like?" I described the landscape, the solitary tree, the haunting familiarity of the brushstrokes. As I spoke, I noticed Mom's face growing pale. "Mom, what is it?" She stood abruptly, crossing the room to an old bookshelf. She pulled out a dusty art book, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "I can't believe I didn't see it before," she muttered. "Here, look at this." She thrust the book into my hands. On the page was a painting nearly identical to the one I'd received. The caption read, "Solitude" by Alfred Winters. "Alfred Winters?" I read aloud. "Who's that?" Mom sank back onto the couch, her face a mask of shock and something else. Guilt? "Alfred is an old friend. We were close years ago, before I met your father." "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process this new information. "But what does he have to do with the painting I received?" Mom took a deep breath. "Alfred is Max's uncle." The room seemed to spin. "What? How is that possible?" "It's a long, complicated story," Mom said, her voice heavy with regret. "Alfred and George, Max's father, had a falling out years ago. Something about an inheritance. Alfred believed George cheated him out of his rightful share." I stared at her, stunned. "And you knew about this? All this time?" She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I lost touch with Alfred after the feud. I never imagined it would come back to haunt us like this." My mind was reeling. The painting, Max's family, my mom's hidden past. It was all connected. But how? And why now? "We need to find Alfred," I said, a new determination filling me. "He's the key to all of this. He must know why I received that painting." Mom looked at me, worry etched on her face. "Jenna, are you sure? Digging into this could be dangerous. These people, Max's family, they're powerful." I stood, my resolve strengthening with each passing moment. "I'm sure, Mom. I've been pushed around, judged, and lied to. It's time I found out the truth, no matter what it costs." As I looked at my mother, seeing the mix of pride and fear in her eyes, I knew I was at a crossroads. The path ahead was uncertain, possibly dangerous. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. "Will you help me?" I asked, extending my hand to her. Mom hesitated for just a moment before taking my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Always, honey. We'll face this together." As we began to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover secrets that would change everything. But I was ready. It was time to fight back. My heart pounded as Mom and I stood outside the imposing gates of Max's family mansion. This time, I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here for answers. "Are you sure about this, Jenna?" Mom asked, her voice tight with concern. I nodded, my jaw set. "We need to know the truth, Mom. About Alfred, about the painting, all of it." We rang the intercom, and after a moment of crackling silence, Carol's voice came through, dripping with false sweetness. "Jenna, dear? What a surprise. And, is that Anne with you?" "We need to talk," I said firmly. "It's important." The gate swung open with a reluctant groan. As we walked up the driveway, I could feel Mom tensing beside me. This place held memories for her, too, I realized. Carol and George were waiting in the foyer, their faces masks of polite confusion. Max stood behind them, his eyes widening when he saw me. "Jenna, what's going on?" he asked, moving towards me. I held up a hand, stopping him. "Not now, Max. We're here to talk about Alfred." The room went deathly quiet. George's face hardened, while Carol's smile became brittle. "I don't know what you think you know," George began, his voice low and dangerous. "We know enough," Mom cut in, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "We know about the feud, about the inheritance, and we know Alfred sent that painting to Jenna." Carol laughed, a high, nervous sound. "That's ridiculous. Alfred's been out of our lives for years. He has nothing to do with Jenna." I pulled out my phone, bringing up the image of Alfred's painting. "Then how do you explain this? The painting I received is nearly identical to one of Alfred's famous works." George's face flushed red. "That proves nothing. Alfred always was a spiteful bastard. He's probably just trying to stir up trouble." "By sending a threatening message to someone he's never met?" I countered. "That doesn't make sense, and you know it." Max stepped forward, his face pale. "Jenna, please, let's talk about this privately." But I was done with secrets and lies. "No, Max, I want the truth, and I want it now. What really happened with Alfred?" The tension in the room was palpable. Carol and George exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "It was a misunderstanding," Carol said finally, her voice trembling. "Alfred thought he was entitled to more of the family fortune than he was. He became unstable. We had to cut ties for our own safety. Liar! Mom's shout made us all jump. Alfred was the kindest, most generous man I've ever known. He would never. You don't know what you're talking about, Anne, George snapped. You weren't there. You didn't see what he became. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This isn't just about money, is it? I said slowly. There's something else. Something you're all hiding. Max grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Jenna, stop. You don't want to go down this road. I wrenched my arm away, fury rising in me. Don't touch me. You've been lying to me this whole time, haven't you? You knew about Alfred, about the painting. You knew everything. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. We're leaving, I announced, grabbing Mom's hand. But this isn't over. I'm going to find Alfred, and I'm going to hear his side of the story. As we turned to go, George's voice stopped us cold. If you pursue this, Jenna, you'll regret it. Some secrets are better left buried. I looked back at him, at this family that had nearly become mine, and felt a chill run down my spine. Is that a threat, George? His smile was cold. Consider it a friendly warning, for your own good. As Mom and I walked out, I could feel the weight of their stares on my back. I had come looking for answers, but all I'd found were more questions and a sense of looming danger. But I wasn't backing down. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, I was going to uncover the truth. And God help anyone who tried to stop me. I paced my living room, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The confrontation with Max's parents had left me shaken, but more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The sound of a key in the lock made me freeze. Max. He walked in, his face a mask of worry and guilt. Jenna, we need to talk. You're damn right we do, I snapped. How long have you known about Alfred, about the painting? Max sank onto the couch, his shoulders slumped. I've always known about Alfred. The family doesn't talk about him, but I knew. And the painting? I pressed, my voice rising. Did you know he was going to send it to me? No. Max's head shot up. I swear, Jenna, I had no idea about that. When you showed it to me, I was as shocked as you were. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had taken root. Then why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me walk into that dinner with your parents completely unprepared? Max ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. I hoped it wouldn't come up, that we could just move forward without dredging up old family drama. Old family drama? I repeated incredulously. Max, your uncle sent me a threatening painting. This isn't just some petty disagreement. I know, he said, his voice pleading. But you have to understand my family. They're complicated. Alfred's accusations nearly tore us apart once. I couldn't risk that happening again. I stared at him, a cold realization settling in my gut. So you chose them over me, over the truth. Max stood, reaching for me. No, Jenna, it's not like that. I love you. I want a future with you. But Alfred, he's unstable, dangerous even. My parents were trying to protect us. I stepped back, out of his reach. Protect us? By lying? By treating me like I'm not good enough for their precious family? That's not fair, Max protested. They just need time to get to know you. No, I said, my voice hard. What's not fair is you hiding all of this from me. What's not fair is you standing by while your parents insulted me and my family. Max's face crumpled. I'm sorry, Jenna. I should have told you everything. But please, can't we move past this? Start fresh? For a moment, I wavered. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe that we could overcome this. But then I remembered the cold threat in George's voice, the secrets that still hung between us. No, Max, I said quietly. We can't, not until I know the whole truth, and I'm going to find it, with or without your help. His eyes widened. What are you going to do? I'm going to find Alfred, I declared. I'm going to hear his side of the story. Jenna, no, Max pleaded. You don't know what you're getting into. Alfred is dangerous. He could hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Hurt me? The only people who've hurt me lately are you and your family. Max grabbed my arm, his grip tight. I can't let you do this. It's too risky. I wrenched away from him, anger and determination surging through me. You don't get to decide what I can and can't do, Max. Not anymore. If you do this, he said, his voice low and urgent, there's no going back. You'll be choosing Alfred over me, over us. I met his gaze, unflinching. No, Max. I'm choosing the truth. And if that means losing you, then so be it. The silence that followed was deafening. Max stared at me, a mix of hurt and anger in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. As it slammed behind him, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. I knew I was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. But I was ready. Whatever came next, whatever truths I uncovered, I would face them head on. I picked up my phone and dialed my mom's number. "Mom, it's time. Let's find Alfred." The drive to Alfred's secluded cabin felt endless. Mom sat beside me, her face etched with worry and anticipation. As we pulled up to the rustic house nestled in the woods, my heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. We approached the door, and I hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed in the quiet forest. Seconds ticked by, then the door creaked open. Alfred stood before us, his silver hair wild, his eyes sharp and wary. He looked from me to Mom, recognition dawning on his face. "Anne?" he breathed, disbelief coloring his voice. Mom stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Hello, Alfred. It's been a long time." His gaze shifted to me, understanding flickering in his eyes. "You must be Jenna. I've been expecting you." We followed him inside, the cabin filled with paintings and the smell of turpentine. Alfred settled into a worn armchair, gesturing for us to sit. "I suppose you're here about the painting," he said, his voice gruff. I nodded, leaning forward. "Why did you send it to me? What did you mean by that message?" Alfred's eyes clouded with pain. I thought you were in on it, that you knew about George's deception and were helping to cover it up." "In on what?" I pressed. "What did George do?" Alfred's face hardened. "He stole everything from me. Not just my inheritance, but my life's work, my paintings, my reputation. He destroyed it all." The story poured out of him, how George had manipulated contracts, spread lies about Alfred's mental state, and ultimately left him penniless and disgraced. "But why involve me?" I asked, my mind reeling. Alfred looked at Mom, his expression softening. "Because of Anne, I thought you might be helping George to keep the truth from her." Mom gasped, reaching for Alfred's hand. "Oh, Alfred, I had no idea, if I had known." As they talked, years of misunderstanding and pain unraveling between them, I felt a surge of anger towards George, towards Max, towards this whole twisted family. "We need to make this right," I declared, standing up. "We need to expose George for what he's done." Alfred shook his head, defeat in his eyes. "It's too late. George is too powerful, too well connected." "No," I said firmly. "It's not too late. We have evidence now. We have your testimony, and I have an idea." I outlined my plan, to use my connections in the art world to organize an exhibition of Alfred's work, to tell his story publicly, to force George to face the consequences of his actions. Alfred's eyes widened. "You would do that? For me?" I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. "Not just for you, for justice, for the truth." As we worked out the details, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't just about exposing George or getting revenge. It was about standing up for what was right, about refusing to be silenced or pushed aside. Weeks later, I stood in the gallery, surrounded by Alfred's stunning paintings. The room buzzed with critics, collectors, and journalists. I saw George and Carol enter, their faces pale with shock. Max appeared at my side, his expression a mix of admiration and regret. "Jenna, I'm sorry. I should have believed in you." I met his gaze, feeling a twinge of sadness but no regret. "Thank you, Max. But this isn't about us anymore." As Alfred took the podium to tell his story, I watched George's facade crumble. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, a sense of justice long overdue. In that moment, I realized that this journey had changed me. I was no longer the woman who doubted herself, who sought validation from others. I had found my strength, my voice. Mom squeezed my hand, pride shining in her eyes. "You did it, honey. You made things right." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "We did it, Mom. Together." As the applause for Alfred filled the room, I knew that whatever came next, whether reconciliation or further battles, I was ready. I had faced my fears, uncovered the truth, and in doing so had discovered my own resilience and power. The painting that had started it all now hung on the wall, no longer a threat, but a testament to the strength of truth and the power of standing up for what's right. And as I looked at it, I saw not just Alfred's brushstrokes, but the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one painted in bold, fearless strokes of my own making.